Chapter 541, A Renowned Name. The one who caught Saul was the steward, Hope. He helped Saul through the main gate, then glanced up at the sky. Just now the mist had surged, but now a small patch of sky above was visible. In that patch of sky, a colorful butterfly was fluttering in circles. The moment Saul stepped into the wizard tower, he immediately felt the drowsiness lift somewhat. From a state where he could fall asleep standing up, he transitioned to simply yawning incessantly. Following the steward's gaze, he looked up as well and saw the same butterfly. Only, behind the butterfly in the sky, a thin veil of cloud had formed a blurry human face. "A dreammaker," Saul murmured. But even such a soft voice was met with a response. "Yes." The voice echoed from inside his brain, making one wonder whether they had already fallen asleep without realizing it. "I want your nightmare butterfly." Just as Saul was about to speak, the voice cut him off again. "Don't lie to me, I saw it." The word stuck in Saul's throat. He pursed his lips, quietly considering his options. The worst-case scenario had arrived faster than expected. Seems I underestimated the power of a third-rank wizard. Hand over the nightmare butterfly and I'll recognize your claim to Rhine Lake. If you don't, I'll make you become Rhine Lake. The voice carried no strong emotion. Rather, it sounded drowsy, like the remnants of a yawn. It didn't feel like a threat, more like the mutterings of a dreamer. Saul furrowed his brows. He could hand over Penny. After Clark left, he could use the diary to summon the nightmare butterfly back. He only needed to feign ignorance afterward, blaming Penny's disappearance on Clark's negligence. But he couldn't be sure Clark wouldn't cast some binding sorcery the moment he got Penny, or worse, destroy her outright. The other party wanted Penny likely for some magic, not to keep her as a pet. If the worst comes to worst, I might have to burn a golden page again. But I know almost nothing about Clark. It could take dozens of deaths just to find a way to survive. Just as Saul was weighing which card to play first, the steward Hope beside him suddenly spoke. "This is the Glare family's wizard tower. May I ask the esteemed Dreammaker what business brings you here?" At the mention of the Glare name, the face in the sky turned its gaze toward the steward. This time, Saul didn't hear a voice in his mind, but the steward's expression changed slightly, as if he had heard something. After 2 seconds, he calmly replied, "My current master indeed is of Glare blood, but his mentor, my former master, is currently at the Wall of Sighs. Should the black tide break out, you may get to meet him and fight alongside him." The face in the sky stopped drifting. A moment later, Saul once again heard a voice in his mind. "Your master is Gorsa." It seemed the other party had deduced Gorsa's identity from Hope's explanation. Though Saul didn't know how the connection was made, this was no time to keep secrets. "Yes," Saul answered. The cloud-formed face slowly blinked. "Tell your mentor, now he owes me." The butterfly suddenly fluttered its wings and flew off into the distance. The cloud face dispersed with the breeze. Gray mist once again enshrouded the island at the lake's center. With the drowsiness gone, Saul stepped outside the wizard tower. "Does Clark have some grudge with my mentor?" Behind him, Hope shook his head. "I'm not sure, Master. I simply thought to state our identity first. If the other party insisted on becoming an enemy, then we'd still need you to step in." Perhaps Hope was just trying to save Saul's pride. But since there were actual benefits gained, Saul didn't care much about appearances. Didn't think Master Gorsa actually knew the Dreammaker. He never mentioned it before. When Gorsa had suggested Saul enter the borderland, he hadn't mentioned any contacts. Saul had assumed either his mentor had no connections here, or that his popularity was just as terrible as it was back in the western region. Who'd have thought this big name could actually be wielded against a third-rank wizard? As for the favor now owed, Well, the Dreammaker said it was Gorsa who owed it. Had nothing to do with Saul. Feeling completely justified, Saul walked over to the prone old witch. Old witch, wake up, the enemy's long gone. The old witch opened her eyes, clear and alert, not like someone who'd just woken up. She sprang up from the ground, glanced at the sky, then at Saul beside her, her expression not very surprised. "I knew you had to have some backing," she said proudly, as if she had driven Clark off. "But what exactly did you two say? Who is your master? Why'd even Clark run off?" Saul didn't answer her questions. I don't think Clark was scared off. He probably just weighed the pros and cons and decided it wasn't worth it. "Let's head into the tower. Don't let your guard down. Clark left for now, but he may return. After all, my master isn't actually here." Perhaps Clark's intrusion into the Purity Wizard Tower had made too much noise. Soon, the incident spread from a secret among a few people to a new rumor across the borderland. Many of Dodge the Wizard's old clients had heard that Rhine Lake now had a new master, one even recognized by Dreammaker Clark. After all, the man had lived through Clark's visit. This, to outsiders, was equivalent to being acknowledged. And Saul's ability to heal pollution began to spread in limited circles. Jiajiagu clearly didn't want to lose such a miraculous healer, so he only shared Saul's information with those he deemed trustworthy. In the borderland, Jiajiagu was far from the only one threatened by pollution and facing potential death at any moment. Unless they had no choice, wizards were reluctant to expose their vulnerable bodies and mental realms to others. Thanks to his master's name, Saul won himself another month of peace and quiet to develop and upgrade his wizard tower. Steward Hope added new furnishings to each floor of the tower. And after experiencing its protection once, Saul finally began to feel a strong connection between himself and the tower. He took out most of his experimental equipment and potions from his storage and placed them on the third floor of the Purity Wizard Tower. With a drop of black tide and 2 bottles of pollution sources from the borderland, Saul resumed his research. A month later, Agu finally awoke. The diary flipped open. Agu Master. Saul, tinkering in the basement, stopped what he was doing and turned his attention to the particularly intact black page in the diary. "Any new feelings?" he asked casually, setting aside the carving knife he had been using for the formation. "Agu, I can't quite say. But why did it take you so long to merge your other 2 soul fragments?" Saul picked up a detector from the lowest shelf and began walking around the room. "Agu, I had been separated for too long. During the fusion, it almost felt like those were 2 different people, so it took a long time to accept their experiences and beliefs. Back when I secretly went to absorb a stranger's soul, it didn't take nearly this long. Did you run into some difficulty?" Master, I was wrong. That wasn't absorption, it was devouring. I only devoured Doomer's energy and select memories. I spat the rest back out." "Oh, is that so?" Saul paused, looking over his other black pages, none as intact or smooth as Agu's. "So that means even Herman's soul, which I extracted directly from his corpse, wasn't that complete? Is that because my technique lacking? Or had Herman's soul already been harvested by someone else? Then again, maybe he accidentally shattered it during that mental realm battle with the Wraith Morden. Well, whatever the case, glad you're awake." Saul walked a few more steps, arriving at a corner of the Wizard Tower's basement. At that moment, the detector pointed to a number that was highly similar to what he had just calculated. "This is the spot." After a few minor adjustments, Saul locked onto the precise location. Then he raised his hand to call the steward over. "You said the Wizard Tower can be further expanded. Well, I want to dig downward here, create a new chamber at least 5 meters high." Hope smiled respectfully. "You possess the heart of the Wizard Tower. You may communicate with it directly." Was Hope referring to the black iron coffin? Chapter 542, Planting Little Algae. Saul marked the spot he needed, then returned to the center of the room. Here stood a circular, dark cyan pillar covered in dim etchings. Saul placed his hand on the pillar, then closed his eyes and sent his mental body through his arm and into it. Very soon, familiar mental fluctuations fed back into his mind. They were hundreds of soul fragments. Mouths, eyes, and unpleasant-looking arms. Perhaps the space was too cramped. These fragments were all tangled together like a mess of yarn that couldn't be unraveled. Saul's mental body slipped through the gaps between them and continued probing inward. At last, within a multicolored halo of light, he found a black iron box. The black iron coffin lay quietly at the very center of the Wizard Tower's support pillar. The surrounding halo pulsed with every shift in color, like the coffin's heartbeat. Saul observed the black iron coffin for a full minute before inserting his mental body into it. 5 minutes passed. Just as Hope was about to step forward to remind Saul, the Wizard Tower suddenly trembled slightly. Saul opened his eyes and saw that in the corner of the room, at the marked location, a square-shaped opening had appeared. He walked over and peered down. Pitch black, not even his meditation method could penetrate it. But this place belonged to his Wizard Tower, after all. Without much hesitation, Saul jumped straight down. During the descent, he realized the air was incredibly dense and heavy with moisture. Even breathing became difficult. By the time his feet touched flat ground again, his clothes were clinging damply to his skin. Is it because this place extends deep underground and is soaked by Lake Rhine that the dampness is so heavy? Saul summoned a small light orb, but its illumination barely reached 2 meters around. So he summoned a few more light orbs to spin around him, finally expanding his visible range. The newly opened space beneath the Wizard Tower was indeed 5 meters tall, but its area was only a few square meters. Still, Saul had created this space for the purpose of planting little algae. Given little algae's current size, this area was more than enough. When it grows up in the future, the Wizard Tower should have accumulated enough energy to continue expanding the second underground level. Come on out, little algae. Take a look at your new home. A black tentacle slipped out from the back of Saul's neck. Back then, in order to follow Saul, it had willingly abandoned its already formed body beneath Gorse's Wizard Tower. It had gladly shrunk into a tiny bean-sized blob and nestled in the back of Saul's neck. And it had stayed there for 4 years. Now, Saul finally had his own territory and could finally give little algae a home of its own. This 5-meter-tall underground floor, he was giving it all to little algae. Play however you like. After all, the Wizard Tower wasn't an ordinary building. It wouldn't collapse. As long as there wasn't a wizard war raging inside. Little algae dropped to the ground and quickly familiarized itself with the environment. Both the humidity and brightness were exactly to its liking. It bounced in front of Saul, split open a shark-toothed mouth, and stuck out a black tongue as if it wanted to lick him. Saul leaned back immediately and pinched little algae's upper and lower jaws with one hand. Squee! Its tongue, now caught in its own bite, instantly rippled like a wave. Saul couldn't help but laugh. Sorry, the position was too perfect, I couldn't resist. But little algae didn't get mad at Saul's prank. It turned around and bounced to the center of the room, then knocked its head against the floor. Here. Saul walked over and drew a simple sorcery formation on the ground with one hand. This formation would turn the soil into a swamp, though not on the massive scale of a proper swamp spell. When the formation began to emit a faint black glow, Saul placed his palm on it, then gently pressed his hand into the mire. According to his original plan, he was supposed to channel magic through his palm, then carefully control the formation to expand the swamp's range. However, just as he began to implement the plan, something unexpected interrupted him. Because a hand suddenly reached out from the unseen depths below and grabbed his. Cold fingers slipped through the gaps between Saul's own and gripped his hand tightly, like a drowning person grasping at their final straw. Saul was startled at first, then suspected it was some wraith from beneath Lake Rhine sneaking its way up to the central island. He wasn't afraid of wraiths. Lake Rhine wasn't rich in resources. No way it could spawn wraiths or specters strong enough to match second-rank power. If it were just a common wraith sneaking in, little Algae alone could deal with it. After the initial shock of being grabbed, Saul quickly calmed down. He gripped back with his other hand and pulled hard. He wanted to see just what kind of wraith dared sneak beneath his wizard tower. Following Saul's strength, a hand was pulled out from the mire, pale and strangely unreal. He kept pulling, an arm, a shoulder, then a lolling head. Herman, it's a ghost girl. It really was a ghost girl. Her skin was like rough grayish-white lime plaster. Her long hair, the same color, hung limply behind her head. Even standing fully upright and raising his hand high, Saul couldn't fully haul the wraith out from underground. She was at least 2 meters tall. Little Algae rushed over to help, wrapped around Saul's waist, and lifted him entirely into the air. Ahem, Saul coughed awkwardly and quickly told little Algae to put him down. Then he casually tossed the wraith to the ground. This wraith is tall, and judging by her body proportions, she was probably this tall to begin with, not stretched out from turning into a wraith. Saul looked at the hand she had grabbed. The wraith's grip was strong. His hand was bruised with bluish-purple marks. But Saul merely shook it off. No need to even use healing magic. His arm returned to normal instantly. Then he stopped caring about his hand and crouched down, looking excitedly at the ghost-like figure on the ground, unconscious and unresponsive. Interesting. If it weren't for the complete lack of life force, she could easily be mistaken for a living person. Saul turned his index finger into an octopus tentacle and gently curled it around the wraith's neck. Still no response. Just like someone truly passed out. Strange. The feedback I'm getting from my tentacle doesn't feel like a soul body at all. He examined other parts of the wraith as well. Weird. She has a certain realness that normal wraiths lack. Is it because of this gray-white skin? And how did she end up like this? Saul's gaze shifted back toward the swamp. Suddenly, he had the urge to go down and take a look. But the moment that thought crossed his mind, the diary in his mind abruptly opened. Lunar calendar, year 318, March 3rd. Curiosity drives progress. Curiosity also digs your grave. Just because you're curious about how something came to be, must you become part of its world? You may have mistakenly believed that the fastest way to study a strange new thing is to become it. A death warning. Saul didn't expect that just from planting little Algae in his own wizard tower, he'd trigger a death warning. Completely absurd. Who farms monsters in a safe zone, huh? Saul casually tossed out a complaint. But he understood clearly. In the borderland, there was no such thing as a true safe zone. Just as Saul turned away, deciding to give up on exploring the swamp and instead study this strange wraith first, Agu spoke up and left him utterly dumbfounded. Agu, this isn't this tower, Master Camus. Chapter 543, The Vanished Crisis. If we rule out the possibility of someone altering her appearance, she really does look exactly like the former master of the Wizard Tower, Camus, from 2 generations ago. Steward Hope also jumped down, examining the unconscious wraith. There was a hint of complexity in Hope's gaze. Though he had already acknowledged Saul as his master, Seeing the face of the former tower master still stirred complicated emotions in him. After all, Camus was the original founder of this wizard tower. He quickly reined in his feelings and stood up to offer his suggestion. Master, before leaving the wizard tower, Wizard Camus had already wiped all traces of her presence from within the tower. Even the characteristics of her mental energy fluctuations in our memories were erased, so I can't make an accurate judgment either. Saul crossed his arms, looking troubled. If this wraith really was the former Tower Master Camus, then he would have to proceed with great caution. But if she wasn't, it was even more problematic. An identical soul appearing out of nowhere was bound to suggest some greater conspiracy. He glanced at the small-scale swamp, the one originally meant to be Little Algy's new home, but now marked with a death warning by the diary. When I first built the Wizard Tower, the diary didn't issue any warnings. Even when I decided to move in here, the diary didn't react. So, it's safe to assume that whatever danger lies beneath the swamp won't erupt in the short term. But still, having something akin to a ticking time bomb beneath his feet wasn't exactly reassuring. I should still go see what's really down there. But the question was who to send. He couldn't bear to risk any of the four consciousness. Even the least useful Herman would occasionally offer valuable insights. Right, I almost forgot. I haven't used the 5th page yet. The 5th diary page contained the first-rank fire element wizard Kent, whom Saul had captured at Baton Academy. Since Kent was particularly knowledgeable in fire element spells, Saul had kept him around as a reference for teaching. As a result, his soul energy had grown quite depleted. To summon him, Saul would need to open the mental realm and inject him with energy. Previously, whenever I brought a consciousness projection out of the diary, I always used a vessel so they could act through a physical body. But in fact, the process of injecting into a vessel is essentially just separating the projection from my mental body. So, could I skip the vessel entirely and let them exist directly in soul form? Saul glanced at Steward Hope standing beside him and kept thinking. Just like the steward, he exists in a rather unique way. Clearly a soul body, yet looks almost real. Even his touch feels nearly lifelike. If he hadn't voluntarily walked out of the black iron coffin, I might not have realized he's not a living human, but part of the Wizard Tower soul system. Hope, Saul said aloud. Yes, master, the steward replied instantly, bowing with a posture of absolute readiness to receive orders. I have several relatively intact soul bodies, but they can't remain stable outside for long. Is there a way to make them exist like you, appear nearly alive, move around freely, and return to the soul container at will? Hope did not disappoint. There is a way, and for you it's not too difficult. Just cover the soul's outer layer with a membrane made of light element magic. That will let the soul appear to have a real body. However, this membrane is purely camouflage. It can't give us the physical properties of a real human body, nor can it withstand strong attacks. It's only good for basic utility. Light element magic. This spell is etched on the surface of the black iron coffin. I can point it out for you. Saul hadn't expected that the runes carved onto the outside of the black iron coffin hid a spell. He nodded. Let's head back up, he said to the steward. He had Little Algy coil up the unconscious. He was tentatively calling her and bring her along as they left. Little Algy hadn't managed to fully root in this spot, so it was a bit irritable, but it still obediently followed Saul's orders and left the second basement level. Camus was motionless now, just like a corpse. But Saul hadn't forgotten how fiercely she had grabbed his hand just moments ago. Her mode of existence is somewhat like the steward, too, except the outer shell appears different, worth studying. Back in the first basement lab, Saul quickly drew a soul-binding magic formation on the floor and placed Camus inside it, to prevent her from waking up and causing trouble. Then, under the steward's guidance, he transcribed the hidden spell structure from the black iron coffin's surface. The spell was called Mimic Body. It wasn't especially hard, at least not for Saul in his current state, who could now learn and master it on his own. With Hope and Agu also giving him some helpful pointers along the way, Saul was able to cast the spell within just 2 days. Though the result wasn't yet as refined as the light elemental shell the steward used. Next, Saul entered the mental realm and pulled out the weakened Kent. He infused him with just enough soul energy to move. After all, Kent would likely be sacrificed to whatever unknown danger lurked in the swamp. Having spent nearly half a year trapped in the Black Diary page, Kent no longer had the arrogance or hostility of his former self when facing Saul again. Perhaps due to the influence of the stars in the mental realm space, Kent seemed a little mentally off after returning to the real world. He could still engage in magical discussions just fine, but otherwise resembled a robot who only followed simple instructions and returned basic feedback. Those stars inside the mental realm are definitely a serious threat, but unfortunately, I still don't dare touch them. Self-experimentation was the most dangerous form of magic. A single mistake meant there might never be a second attempt. So even though he was aware that those stars inside his mental realm could be a hidden danger, Saul still had no way to deal with them for now. Luckily, the diary hadn't issued any warnings about them yet, so Saul could still sleep soundly at night. Go on now, head beneath the swamp and see what's really down there. Wrapped in a mimic body, Kent moved stiffly, but still advanced step by step toward the swamp on the second basement level. Saul kept a close watch on the diary. If the diary warned that Kent's descent would bring Saul fatal danger, he would immediately call off the test. But even after Kent was fully swallowed by the swamp, the diary gave no reaction. 5 minutes later, his anxious head popped back up from the surface, followed by his whole body and legs. He walked back to Saul, and in his eyes was a trace of fear. No danger. His voice was utterly flat. Nothing at all. Nothing that seemed unnatural or different from the surrounding environment. No. Saul was puzzled. He looked at the swamp again, now seriously considering whether he should go down there himself. This time, the fleeting thought of going down there personally didn't trigger the diary's warning. What's going on? Is it safe for me to go down now? Was the previous danger already gone and the force that sent Camus up here already left? His mind was filled with question marks. But he knew he wouldn't get answers just by thinking. Saul finally decided to investigate personally. Just as he was preparing for a spirit separation spell, little Algae tapped him on the shoulder and then pointed its small head toward the swamp. You want to go check for me? Little Algae nodded. There might be danger. Just because it wasn't deadly for Saul didn't mean it was safe for little Algae. Little Algae responded by growing a separate branch right in front of Saul. A clone? All right then, be careful. If anything feels wrong, cut it off immediately. Don't hesitate. Little Algae nodded and extended a black, vine-like tendril into the underground. 10 minutes later, the tendril emerged again, joyfully swaying side to side. The danger was truly gone. At the same time, the tip of the tendril opened up in front of Saul and spat out a bit of dark brown soil. Saul casually grabbed an empty Petri dish from storage and caught the soil. What is this? You think something's off about it? Little Algae nodded. Saul gently stirred the small lump of soil with a glass rod. Soon he spotted tiny black specks, powder that didn't dissolve into the rest of the dirt. This might be the trace left behind by the danger that made the diary issue a crisis alert. Saul's eyes lit up as he scratched little Algae under the chin. Good job, little Algae. Chapter 544, The Rhine Lake Mutation. The moment Saul got his hands on the powder that retained traces of the crisis, he immediately began his research. However, after studying it for quite a while, he still couldn't analyze its exact components. It didn't seem like soil, nor was it any kind of crystal. He had absolutely no clue what it was. It's like a substance I've never seen before. Saul decided to consult the old witch, to see if she might recognize it. And so, after spending 4 days in the basement, Saul finally emerged. "I thought you died in there." The old witch was standing right at the basement exit, looking very displeased. Having lived in the wizard tower for over a month now, she had gone from a 2-head-tall toddler to a 4-head-tall little girl. From a baby to a petite loli. Well, except for the face. "I ran into some problems during the experiment. Took longer than expected. By the way, old witch, you're well informed and a long-time resident of the borderland. Ever seen a material like this?" Saul placed the petri dish in front of the old witch. "Where did you get this stuff?" The old witch gave it a casual glance, then her expression changed drastically. "So you do know it. Well, telling you's no big deal, I guess. Sooner or later, if you stay in the borderland long enough, you'll run into it anyway." The old witch's expression turned complicated. "This is residue from a source of pollution in the borderland. We call it Erie sand." Erie sand. It's been found that every location where Erie sand appears ends up with a new rule. Heh, congratulations. The rule of Rhine Lake that you just deciphered. It's now obsolete. Next, we'll have to risk our necks figuring out the new rules here. The old witch didn't look too pleased. Every time new rules were explored, the cost was heavy, many lives lost. And even then, people often failed to uncover all the rules. As a result, there were occasionally wizards who just dropped dead in the places they'd lived for years, seemingly for no reason. Saul thought to himself, but the diary hasn't indicated any danger yet. Plus, that soul inside it who might be Camus still shows no signs of awareness. He asked the old witch again, "Is this Erie sand dangerous, or does it have any use?" "Not much use. It's like the residue left after all energy has been drained. Of course, there's still some radiation pollution. If you give it to an ordinary person, it's definitely fatal." Indeed, there was a trace of radiation on the Erie sand, but for apprentices at second rank or higher, it didn't pose much threat. Just then Marsh, who lived outside the tower, came dashing in with hurried footsteps, panting, his face full of anxiety. "My lord Rhinelake is frozen." Saul and the old witch exchanged glances and stood up at the same time. When they came outside, they saw that the dense fog, which previously limited visibility to under 10 meters, had somehow thinned out quite a bit. What remained was a dreamy, ethereal mist, like a scene from a fairyland, floating above Rhine Lake and the island at its center. Even from dozens of meters away, Saul could clearly see that the surface of Rhine Lake was now covered in a thick sheet of ice. This made the temperature around the lake island drop even further. Though March marked the beginning of spring, it now felt like February, the air piercing through skin with its chill. Saul walked briskly to the lakeside and stared at the ice. Those wraiths he had once seen beneath the lake, the ones who had stared back at him in their confusion, were now obscured from view. He wondered what state they were in now. Luckily, his experimental subjects hadn't run out yet. Saul called over the stiff-faced Kent. The old witch squinted. She instantly recognized that Kent was not a living person, and that he was likely of the same nature as that steward. But as for how exactly he was constructed, she didn't know, not that she cared to figure it out either. There were too many unknowns in this world. She wasn't interested in solving each and every one. But things like the rules of Rhine Lake, things that directly affected her, she was still willing to use her brain on. She walked over to Saul's side and pinched a bit of air between her fingers, shaping it into a small bird with whirlwind wings. Go! With a soft shout, she released her hand. The little bird flew straight toward the ice, full of heroic resolve as if on a suicide mission. But the moment it crossed the boundary between the lakeside and the ice above, it abruptly vanished. Its whirlwind wings dispersed into a wisp of breeze, yet the breeze didn't even disturb the faint surrounding mist. A magic-sealed zone, the old witch's face darkened even more. By this point, Kent had reached Saul's side. Though the old witch's airbird had vanished, Saul still ordered Kent to step onto the ice. Kent lacked any sense of danger. Once Saul gave the command, he moved forward. Likewise, the moment he stepped onto the ice, he vanished entirely. Saul had been watching him closely. This time he noticed it. As Kent crossed the boundary between shore and lake, the elemental construct spells around his body instantly dissolved. And his soul, almost too fast for the eye to track, was dragged beneath the ice by some mysterious force of rule. Saul pondered for a moment, then walked to the lake's edge. "Hey, don't go looking to die," the old witch shouted to stop him. "I know." Saul, while monitoring the diary's reactions, tried to use it to retrieve Kent's soul from the depths of Rhine Lake. And he succeeded, easily pulling Kent's soul back into the diary. Apparently, the rules of Rhine Lake didn't prevent souls from leaving, but more likely, the diary's power simply overrode this region's rules. Saul fetched a new soul body used for experiments and embedded a summoning spell coordinate into it. But this time, after the soul entered the lake beneath the ice, Saul was unable to summon it back. The coordinate vanished the moment the soul crossed the lake's surface. Magic vanishes once it enters Rhine Lake's range. Souls get pulled beneath the ice. So, what about using physical means to retrieve the soul? Saul had little Algie split off a long tendril, like a fishing line, and cast one end toward the lake. This new tendril couldn't split again on the ice, but its mouth at the tip could chew. It chewed for a full 10 minutes before it gnawed a small hole into the ice. Then it slipped in and used its mouth to carry the fallen soul back out. It returned inch by inch and brought it to Saul. Back in the Elven Valley, little Algie had devoured a piece of veiled crystal essence and mutated. As a result, unlike other creatures from the soul-devouring mire, it could touch physical matter, soul bodies, and even mental entities like nightmare butterflies. But when the split-off part of little Algie crawled back to shore and opened its mouth to Saul, Saul and the old witch saw clearly. This wasn't the same soul body Saul had thrown in earlier. Well, yeah, asking your clone to tell one soul from another is a bit much. Saul patted little Algie on the head. "That pet of yours is something else," the old witch said, eyes full of envy as she looked at little Algie. "Powerful, obedient, and useful." Saul didn't respond, either way not for sale. He walked back to the lakeside. Soul bodies get pulled into the lake bottom, magic gets nullified, but little Algie can move on the ice and even chew through it. Looks like the rules here aren't that strong, at least not instantly lethal. But little Algie is a magic beast, so it can go up there. What about us? Saul stepped forward tentatively. The old witch's eyes went wide. She didn't even have time to stop him. Saul had already taken a second step. Now he stood fully on the ice. Her jaw dropped, her head practically tipping backwards. You lunatic." Chapter 545, Sneaking Off. Saul stood on the frozen lake, feeling the chill seeping up through his feet. But aside from the cold, there didn't seem to be any danger. The diary didn't give any warning, but I didn't expect there to be any danger at all. He took another couple of steps forward. Still, nothing happened. The only issue was that he couldn't cast spells. The magic heat just circulated, vanished the moment it left his body. Saul released his soul body to trace the path of those elemental particles. He discovered that the particles were also flowing beneath the ice. So I just can't cast spells. That means I'll have to walk whenever I leave the island in the middle of the lake. It's kind of far. Maybe I should buy a car. Saul walked straight to the center of the lake, then slowly made his way back. The old witch watched from the side, intrigued, and finally couldn't resist stepping onto the ice herself. Before long, even Marsh and little Algie joined in, running onto the frozen surface with excitement. Only the butler remained inside the wizard tower, smiling as he watched them. After a few minutes of play, Saul left the others and returned to the tower. The change in Lake Rhine was most likely caused by Camus, whom he had just picked up. Besides her, nothing else out of the ordinary had happened today. Saul headed down to the basement, preparing to study Camus. The butler, although a soul body, had a layer of magic called the template that allowed him to move and interact with objects like a normal person. Camus had displayed the same trait. It was precisely the plaster-like coating on her body's surface that made Saul curious. While she remained unconscious, the only thing Saul was interested in was that layer of coating on her. He planned to study the template magic and the coating on Camus to see if he could combine the two and develop a new spell, one that could be used by the four consciousnesses inside the diary. At first, he had wanted to use corpses as vessels to carry the consciousnesses, allowing them to act independently of the diary. But over time, and after several adventures, he'd come to realize that forcing flexible soul bodies into clunky corpses didn't offer much of an upgrade. Seeing the butler today and Camus, who shared the same texture, sparked an idea. He could give the consciousnesses a protective outer shell, allowing them to move around externally. Even without bodies, without magic, and unable to cast spells, they could still fight purely as soul bodies, just like the mouths and hands in the black iron coffin. Especially now that he'd already developed soul, had outfitted and with spider legs made of soul fragments, and those could serve as her weapons. Without the burden of a corpse, she could retain the stealth of a soul body. Her combat style would be based on ambushes. It didn't sound very honorable, but survival was all that mattered. Watching Saul run his experiments, a few of the smarter consciousnesses quickly caught on to what he was doing. Agu and Morden immediately started offering suggestions. Hold still, not bad. Gorsa straightened up, a pleased smile on his face. Today, for once, he wasn't wearing a wizard robe or a cloak that covered his entire body. He wore a white lace shirt with long pants and boots, a fashion trend that had become popular in recent years in Nefret. Elegant yet conservative. He dressed like this because he planned to sneak out of the wizard tower. Half a month ago, another wave of the black tide had struck the wall of size. A towering black flood, massive as a mountain, crashed down on the even mightier wall with an overwhelming force that could crush anything in its path. Though already immensely sturdy, the wall still suffered some damage. The receding tide took away bricks and stones, leaving behind a battered surface and a host of terrified wizards. But the crashing of the tide was only the prelude to the real crisis of the black tide. The Wall of Size, manned by most of the world's top third-rank wizards, soon faced an outbreak of pollution. Strange, writhing, and twisted monsters began to spawn along the tide-battered walls. Immediately afterward, deadly spells, some dazzling, others silent, rained down on the creatures. Some were obliterated in a single blow, reduced to powder and swept away by the next wave of the tide. Others were more tenacious and agile, still capable of posing a threat to the patrolling wizards atop the Wall of Size. Out in the sea beyond the wall, clusters of wizard towers dotted the ocean like stars in the night sky. These towers were mostly provided by the Glare family, cementing their supreme status in the wizarding world. The wizards stationed in these towers, known as Tower Guardians, were typically powerful third-rank combatants with strong survival abilities. They didn't participate in the wall's battles. They had a more critical role, stopping or killing the colossal monsters that occasionally emerged from the deep sea. Thankfully, such monsters were rare. Otherwise, no number of guardians would be enough to hold the line. Gorsa was one of the tower guardians stationed closest to the deep sea, and in the last battle, he had fought valiantly and slain a monster with unmatched bravery. Unfortunately, he'd fallen into the black tide, tainted sea during the fight. Though he teleported out at the fastest possible speed, his entire body had suffered corrosive injuries, forcing him to retreat behind the wall of size to recover. Fortunately, the most dangerous phase of the black tide had already passed, and the fourth-rank wizard overseeing the wall gave him official leave. With official approval, Gorsa retreated to the Glare family's territory and went into seclusion. At least, that's what it looked like on the surface. In truth, he had smuggled his apprentice Haywood in with him. Today, he wrapped Haywood entirely in pink bandages and draped him in a reddish-brown cloak, inscribed with healing formations. Even if someone saw through the bandages, they'd only see a real injury victim beneath. Haywood's body was covered in open wounds, and his 5 facial features, except for his eyes, had become nothing but 5 holes. A genuine wounded man. "Take a look." Gorsa pulled out a palm-sized mirror and held it up to Haywood. "Do you like pink?" Haywood wanted to say he liked it, but he just couldn't get the words out. At times like this, Gorsa really missed his little apprentice. But appearance didn't matter. The true purpose of the pink bandages was to mask the aura of a third-rank apprentice. Haywood had recently failed in his attempt to become a true wizard and was now completely useless. But Gorsa had given him one last chance to stay. He would become Gorsa's stand-in. A shadow detached itself from Gorsa's back, quickly morphing into the form of a beautiful noblewoman. Haywood, recently flayed and heavily wounded, could only lie on a recliner and weakly greet her. "Lady Yura." Seeing Haywood like this, Yura's eyes flickered as though a memory stirred, but the image in her mind was quickly swallowed by a haze. She didn't respond to Haywood's greeting. Instead, she turned to Gorsa, who stood there like an arrogant noble. "Your injuries are truly healed. Do you have to leave now? Did Wizard Mofi give you 6 months to recover?" Gorsa flicked his fingers, making the mirror spin between them. "I have a lot of places to visit. Just do your best to support Haywood's disguise and don't get exposed. Oh, and teach Heidi how to maintain her form." Another shadow crept out from the back of Haywood's head, though this one remained unstable, like a reflection on water constantly rippling. Heidi had also been transformed into Yura's current appearance, though the materials used weren't as high quality, making her form unstable. Which meant this time, Yura couldn't accompany Gorsa on his trip. But Yura didn't mind. "Where are you going?" she asked, face emotionless, voice flat. "First to the southern islands of Nefrit," Gorsa said, not hiding anything. "There's a material there I'm interested in." He stopped the spinning mirror. The reflection now faced him, capturing the light of anticipation in his eyes. "Then I'll make a trip to the borderland. There's a little fellow there who interests me even more." Chapter 546, Camus Awakens. The anomaly at Lake Rhine hadn't caused much of an impact on its new owner, but rumors of the change quickly spread, thanks to some passing-by wizards. Half a month later, the first patient Saul had ever received since calling himself a healer, Jiajiagu, returned. This time, he brought along quite a bit of cargo. "Long time no see, Wizard Saul, or perhaps I should call you Healer Saul now." Saul didn't much care. "I specialize in pollution-related healing, but I'm also a wizard. Call me whatever you like." "Then I'll stick with Wizard Saul. I feel that title expresses my respect best." Jiajiagu dropped the massive pack from his back, but didn't undo the shoulder straps. There was still some adhesion between his back and the pack that hadn't fully dissolved. "This time, I've brought part of the items from your list. Would you care to take a look?" He carefully took a crumpled sheet of paper from his coat, smoothed it out with great care, and handed it to Saul. The list was one Saul had given him, detailing a large number of necessary and potentially useful materials, some of them quite rare. As Saul read through the list, his brow furrowed deeper and deeper. Jiajiagu was, after all, just a wandering trader. The basic alchemical and magical supplies were all there. But the more valuable and rarer items were few and far between. Of the rare materials Saul wanted most, the ones he deliberately mixed into the list, not a single one had been acquired. Still, it was like a household needing both a refrigerator and a trash bin. Even though most of what Jiajiagu brought were common items, they would still help perfect the Wizard Tower's basic infrastructure, making life here more convenient for Saul. In return, Saul offered large quantities of magic crystals and surplus materials from his own stores. But after handing over the goods, Jiajiagu didn't immediately take the payment. He rubbed his hands together, trying to curry favor with an ingratiating smile. "Wizard Saul, do you think the pollution on my back could be completely removed this time?" He was starting to suspect that Saul hadn't completely removed the corruption before, because he wanted to keep some kind of leverage over him. Saul, however, answered seriously, "The pollution on your body isn't all that severe. If it's just surface-level pollution, I can remove that easily. The real issue is the source of the pollution. It's been parasitizing you for quite some time. If we forcefully remove it, there's a risk to your life. So, if we want to completely and safely extract the pollution, we'll need a targeted method, one that can numb the pollution source on your body to prevent any backlash from the separation." Saul was telling 9 parts truth, 1 part fiction, and Jiajiagu was left staring, dumbfounded. "Of course, if you're willing to take the risk right now, I could attempt a full removal immediately. I haven't tried it yet. It would actually be a great opportunity to experiment." Saul's eyes gleamed. Jiajiagu quickly waved his hands, trembling. No need. I'm not in a hurry. Please, Wizard Saul, take your time and find a safe method to extract it." Saul nodded, looking a little disappointed. If he couldn't fully remove the corruption, then Jiajiagu would just have to pay in magic crystals like everyone else. After they wrapped up the trade, Jiajiagu enthusiastically shared some recent news he thought might interest Saul. One of them was that the Dreammaker Clark had publicly acknowledged Saul as the new master of Lake Rhine. But neither the Lord Firefly nor the Wind Sprite had made any statements yet. Some people were getting restless and might have come here to investigate. Jiajiagu warned Saul to be careful. Speaking of being careful, Saul suddenly thought of someone. "By the way, Jiajiagu, some time ago, a wolf creature wearing human skin came to me asking for help removing pollution from an item. Did you send him?" "You met the direwolf?" Jiajiagu was shocked. "That wasn't someone I sent. I was actually introducing you to a first-rank wizard friend when I realized a direwolf had snuck nearby and was eavesdropping. Looks like it overheard us after all." Saul gave the anxious Jiajiagu a long look, but didn't press to see how much of that was truth. Once the trade of goods and information was complete, Jiajiagu set off again, promising to continue looking for the rare materials Saul wanted. In return, Saul collected a fresh sample of Jiajiagu's pollution for further research. Through Jiajiagu, Saul could not only buy basic essentials, but also stay up to date with the outside world. After setting a list of goods for their next meeting, Saul walked back to the Wizard Tower. The moment he returned, Marsh came rushing up to him. Sir, the Pale Lady is awake." "Pale Lady? Camus?" Saul immediately rushed into the wizard tower. Ever since he dug up the soul of the tower's former master, he'd been waiting for her to wake up. To prevent retaliation, he and the old witch had devised a magic formation specifically for restraining spirit bodies. But if this person, who looked like Camus, really was the Camus he knew, she was likely a third-rank wizard at least. If Saul hadn't had the diary and his natural advantages when dealing with souls, he might have opted to destroy or discard her soul immediately. The farther away, the better. Still, he wanted to make the most of what he had. After all, not everyone could just stumble upon a nearly intact third-rank wizard's soul. The first project Saul had been working on, combining the vessel spell with the white substance coating Camus's spirit body, had yet to show real progress. Maybe her awakening would help. Both eager and wary, Saul descended to the tower's first basement level. A special arcane cell had been prepared for Camus here. When Saul arrived, Camus and the old witch were staring at each other. The steward wasn't around, probably off handling chores. "How is she? Is her mind clear?" Saul asked urgently. The old witch rolled her eyes. "Looks like an idiot to me." Camus, however, just sat there with the same blank expression. Her legs were tilted to the side, elegantly crossed, her hands folded gently in her lap. She looked graceful like a statue. Saul crouched down, trying to meet her eyes at her level. "Excuse me, are you Wizard Camus?" There was no response. She continued staring blankly forward. "Hello, I'm Saul. This is my wizard tower." "It's no use," the old witch muttered, already bored. "She's stiffer than wood." She was only allowed to look. Saul wouldn't let her touch. Since the old witch wasn't well-versed in soul studies, her interest in Camus was limited. When she first heard Camus had woken, or at least moved, she'd come running. But when the soul didn't respond, she lost interest and left shortly after. Lately, Saul hadn't been paying her much attention either, and he wasn't studying the rest of her lingering pollution anymore. Even so, the old witch wasn't planning to leave. The wizard tower now had not just a fog barrier, but a magic nullification field. It was the perfect hiding place for her. After all, she was still wanted by both the Firefly and the Wind Sprite, two powerful third-rank wizards. After she left, Saul tried a few more times. He even mentioned Gorsa and the Glare family, but the statue before him still didn't react. Maybe she hasn't fully woken up yet. Saul wasn't discouraged. He had plenty of time now, after all. So he returned to his research, carefully peeling off a tiny bit of the gray-white outer layer from Camus's soul. There was no reaction. Getting no useful feedback, Saul resigned himself to the lab. He wanted to analyze the composition of this white substance. He wasn't getting nothing, but the results were bizarre enough to make him question his own calculations. "There's something wrong with your experiment environment. You need to evacuate the air." Saul froze mid-motion and looked back. Camus had turned her head toward him at some point. Her face was still emotionless. Saul pointed at her neck. "Could you maybe turn your head back the other way? I'm not used to talking to someone who's facing me while I'm looking at their back." Chapter 547, Driven Mad by Perfectionism. Camus went silent again. It was as if every one of her actions existed solely to point out the flaws in Saul's experiment. Yet when Saul brought the materials back over, crouched down in front of her again, she said nothing once more. Just twisted her neck and kept staring at his back. At first glance, it was actually kind of creepy. Seeing that Camus still wouldn't move, Saul looked down at the beaker in his hand, then casually tossed in a magic crystal. At that moment, Camus's head snapped around. The magic power in magic crystals is impure. It's not suitable to be added directly to the materials. Saul responded immediately, but to strip and purify this layer of Energy shield on you, only magic will work. Mental force would cause contamination. Camus went silent again. TSS. Saul's teeth ached. After a moment of thought, he tossed in another magic crystal. This batch of materials was basically ruined anyway, but that didn't matter. The source of materials was right in front of him and staying perfectly still for his use. The magic power in magic crystals is impure. It's not suitable to be added directly to the materials. The second crystal landed in the beaker, earning him the exact same line from Camus. The corner of Saul's mouth lifted slightly as he stood up again. Little algae. A black vine-like tentacle emerged. Ever since the mission to plant little algae had been disrupted by Camus last time, Saul hadn't let it go underground again, just in case it caused any more danger below. So for now, it still stayed parasitized at the back of Saul's neck. Not in a rush to rebuild its foundation, it spent its days happily playing with the occasionally emerging penny. Little algae, I've got a task for you. Here's a beaker, and here's a pile of magic crystals. Saul paused mid-instruction, thinking it was a bit wasteful, so he ground the thumb-sized crystals down to millet-sized fragments. Your task is to count to 10, then drop one crystal fragment into the beaker. Little algae nodded happily, splitting off a thin tendril that carefully picked up a tiny fragment with its tip, then went plop as it dropped it into the beaker. The magic power in magic crystals is impure. It's not suitable to be added directly to the materials. Sure enough, Camus's mechanical warning came again. This time Saul didn't get mad. He simply turned back to his experiment. He wasn't even annoyed by the repeated voice behind him, just treated it like background music. You like pretending to be a robot, huh? He thought, distracted. Let's see if you've got the patience of a machine then. 10 minutes later. Little algae still hadn't finished tossing all the fragments. It tended to mess up its counting between 1 and 10, and the timing of each count varied wildly. Then Saul heard a different voice. This is meaningless, the voice said softly, almost like a sigh. Saul didn't even look back. How is it meaningless? It's called OCD therapy. No reply again. Saul didn't call it off. Little algae kept tossing. Plop. I don't know what else to say except that. Perfect, finally, something other than repetition. Saul wiped the smile off his face and turned around. Communication should depend on the situation, the person you're talking to, and the prior context. For example, if I ask you, who are you? Where did you come from? Why did you come up from underground? Camus was silent for a moment, then finally tried to answer. I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. Amnesia. Saul had considered the possibility. After all, she was in a soul state now, who knew what she'd been through between life and death. So before you woke up this time, did you remember anything at all? Try to recall. Don't just say, I don't know, right away. Camus froze as if her system had crashed. This time, Saul patiently waited 5 minutes. Water everywhere. I was disappearing. Her voice trembled slightly, though her face remained expressionless. Water, could it be Lake Rhine? Saul frowned. That didn't seem right. Something from below the lake that could absorb spirit bodies and magic shouldn't have been able to completely trap a third rank. Maybe she was caught by some powerful rule or killed and had her power stripped away, Saul speculated. Then he asked, you said you were disappearing. Was that why you created this protective layer around your soul body? Camus fell into thought again, but this time for a shorter period. I think so. Saul asked a few more questions. Some he repeated in various ways, and finally came to a conclusion. Camus had amnesia. There's one black diary page left. Should I try putting her in the diary? With the diary's purification ability, it might help Camus recover her memory. Saul was tempted to try, but when he went to implement it, he ran into a problem. He couldn't absorb Camus. Even just trying to pull in a finger, he failed. It was as if she wasn't a pure soul anymore, affected by some other power or pollution. There's definitely some other secret beneath that pale gray outer layer. If the diary couldn't absorb Camus's soul, then a third-rank wizard posed a far greater threat. But a third rank who had lost her memory, yet still retained instinctual knowledge. Saul didn't have the heart to discard or destroy that soul. Better to keep her around and observe. Saul didn't dwell on it too long. He reinforced the formation restricting Camus, and very bluntly discussed with her how best to limit herself. Camus didn't seem to think there was anything odd about that. With her usual blank expression, she answered Saul's questions earnestly. Apparently being bound wasn't a problem. Watching little Algie mess with materials seemed more important. Just as Saul was happily watching Camus weave her own cocoon, little Algie, whether zoning out or just completely messing up its count, finally reached 10 again. Plub! It tossed another crystal into the beaker. The magic power in magic crystals is impure. It's not suitable to be added directly to the materials. Camus couldn't help herself. She blurted it out. Little Algie grinned and wobbled happily. So, you can stop now, little Algie. And just like that, Camus obediently remained confined in the underground first floor of the Wizard Tower. Not only did she cooperate with Saul's experiments, she even helped with improving her own restraints. From the look of her, she seemed to genuinely enjoy researching knowledge. She didn't care at all about being trapped in a space less than 4 square meters. When the old witch heard that the wooden puppet of a soul had started speaking, she couldn't resist coming to watch the show. At this point, the old witch had transformed from a chibi 4-head-tall girl into a 5-head-tall one. From little Lowly to big Lowly. Body was passable now, but the head was still just as hideous. Saul noticed that Camus was staring at the old witch's exposed arm but said nothing, so he asked, "What do you think of the old witch's body transformation?" Camus withdrew her gaze. "I don't comment on failed creations." "Who are you calling a failed creation?" The old witch could tolerate Saul, but not Camus, especially since she didn't know Camus's potential identity. She immediately sealed the air around Camus and began compressing it inward. But Camus didn't budge an inch. Her form remained completely unaffected. The old witch's eyes flickered, then she abruptly switched spells, extracting all energy from around Camus. Yet there was still no reaction. Only then did Saul step in. "Can't you tell her soul is off? Why are you getting worked up?" He was much more interested in that protective layer surrounding Camus now. One of the reasons for keeping her around was to find a way to wrap himself and the other soul bodies in that same layer. Of course, that was only if the grayish-white shield didn't harm his own soul. So the test subjects would have to be the other soul bodies first. Chapter 548, The Third Patient. Camus claimed that the old witch's body modification was a failed creation. Even though Saul had been the secondary designer of that modification, he didn't take offense at Camus's evaluation. His redesign had, after all, been based on the old witch's original framework, with further refinements added, and he had also integrated a bit of fleshcraft as an experiment. Back then, Saul had even considered accepting the procedure himself if the old witch had insisted on him becoming the test subject. Of course, he'd planned to improve it afterward, possibly even scrap the entire formula for the perfect body and start over from scratch. After all, when he derived the perfect body's formula, time had been tight and materials scarce. Moving forward, Saul intended to continue researching the principles behind Camus's protective barrier, both its formation and maintenance, as a foundation for perfecting his own work on the perfect body and fleshcraft modifications. Most of the experimental materials he'd asked Jiajiagu to collect were meant for this body modification endeavor. Only after thorough theoretical analysis and practical testing would he finally apply it to himself. Camus was proving to be an excellent theoretical advisor, offering her insights without complaint. Her suggestions were given with no ill intent. The diary could attest to that. The only one unhappy about all this was the old witch. She was constantly being brought up as a negative example. Over time, she grew unwilling to come watch Saul and Camus's experiments. She didn't like theoretical work to begin with, and after leaving behind some of her body tissue, she returned to the second floor of the Wizard Tower, focusing fully on adapting to her perfect body. Her height, consequently, had been shooting up day by day. Spring passed and summer came, but the Purity Wizard Tower remained steeped in a chilly, early winter atmosphere. Jiajiagu visits almost once every month. Last month, Saul had cleansed his back of pollution again. As a result, Jiajiagu was now able to separate his backpack from his back. But after 3 seconds of contemplation, he still chose to keep the pack strapped on. What could you do? This was adult life, full of compromises. Even knowing something was harmful to your body, you still had to press on for a living. As thanks, Jiajiagu gave Saul an ice wolf. Combined with Coachman Marsh's skillfully crafted open-top, single-passenger cart, Saul finally didn't have to walk everywhere when coming and going from the tower. After several months of observation, Saul confirmed that there was no more danger beneath the tower, and eventually decided to plant Little Algae on the second underground floor. Little Algae was an earth elemental magic creature. If kept away from soil for too long, it would stagnate and rely solely on mutation to grow stronger. Too many variables in that root. This time, Little Algae took root smoothly. It was delighted. By the very next day, black tentacles were crawling all over the walls of the second underground level. Like climbing ivy. But to truly grow, Little Algae needed to feed on corpses and souls. Meanwhile, Saul's body modification experiments also required flesh and blood, so the list of items Jiajiagu was tasked with acquiring expanded once more. This particular day, Saul and Camus were standing over N, discussing her condition in detail, and stood proudly, chest out, without a shred of embarrassment. "It's a bit better than the base body," Saul said, arms folded. "But after adding the gray matter, it lost some toughness and flexibility." "There's conflict between the two rune systems," Camus said, standing rigidly inside the binding formation like a block of wood. Maybe they're reacting to each other, Saul fell into thought, and wasn't as obsessed with perfection as they were. Being able to leave the diary in soul form was far more comfortable than squeezing into someone else's corpse. And she was very nimble, too. With a thought, her lower body shifted from long, slender legs into 8 spider limbs. The sharp tips sliced a few long scratches into the floor. "Put those away for now," Saul said immediately, distressed over his tower. "We'll let you test the blades outside sometime." This was a new emotion for him. When you're not the head of the household, you don't realize how much everything costs. Knock, knock, knock. Someone was knocking. Little Algae slithered over to open the door. The steward appeared, stepped forward, and said, "Master of the tower," someone appeared by the lake. "They're asking for help with pollution cleansing." "Ha, finally some business," Saul chuckled and shook his head. "Jiajiagu, been advertising for months now. Good thing I don't rely on this to eat." He walked halfway out the door, then turned back to storing away before leaving for real. As Saul left, the steward also turned to leave, but as he raised his head, he noticed Camus watching him. His motion to shut the door paused slightly. "No matter what the truth is," Hope said, "I still want to say, it's good to see you again, Lady Camus. And also, this is now Lord Saul's Wizard Tower. Like the Master, I welcome you here." Camus didn't respond. It was unclear whether she understood what he meant. Saul arrived at the lake in his cart and saw a man and woman, both wizards, peering warily across the frozen lake surface. The fog was thin, and both parties spotted each other quickly. Saul pulled on the reins and stopped the cart atop the ice without getting down. The wizard tower was still some distance from the lake's edge, now that the lake had frozen. The entirety of Lake Rhine, except for the island at its center, had become a magic-suppressed zone. Communication between those inside and outside was extremely difficult. But when magic couldn't serve, people had plenty of primitive methods to fall back on. The old witch had suggested installing a sign at the lakeside and having visitors cast 3 minor fireballs into the sky to request treatment. But that would have required someone to keep constant watch. The steward's idea was to place a bell there. Saul, however, took a more resourceful approach. He stationed a clone of little algae at the lakeside. If someone showed up, the clone could even conduct preliminary identity checks. Then it could split off a smaller clone to deliver a simple message regarding the visitor's purpose. Magical creatures were still creatures. They could move on ice, they just couldn't split again. And if no visitors came, the clone could remain hidden underground. If an ambush occurred, it could issue a warning or launch a counter-ambush itself. Thus, it was the little clone's message that had prompted the steward to inform Saul. Since little algae had already conveyed the visitor's intent, Saul addressed them directly from his seat. "Good morning. Which one of you is seeking pollution cleansing?" The male and female wizard exchanged glances, both slightly surprised at Saul's youth. "Your healer, Saul," the female wizard asked, her face pale. "Calling me healer right off the bat, that's the tone of someone desperate for help." Saul's mind turned quickly. He smiled and nodded. "Let me make this clear. I have helped a few wizards struggling with pollution, but I can't guarantee I can remove every kind of it." He leaned forward slightly, eyes on the pale woman. "May I take a look at your polluted area?" But it was the muscular male wizard who scowled and said, "I'm the one asking for treatment." He then cast an annoyed glance at the woman, his lips moving as if using a transmission spell. The female wizard's face went even paler. "Jia said you saved his life," the man added. "And since a Dreammaker vouched for you, we figured it was worth giving it a shot." Saul showed no change in expression. He simply turned to the muscular man and asked, "Then may I see the affected area on your body?" "If you're so skilled," the man grumbled, "why can't you tell where I'm polluted just by looking?" Despite his skepticism, he still removed his coat cooperatively. Both of the man's arms were a reddish-brown color, but beyond that, there didn't appear to be anything obviously wrong. It was the bulging muscles that left the biggest visual impression. Saul, thin and not tall, couldn't help feeling a little envious. "You sure this is pollution and not just a curse wound?" Saul asked. The muscular wizard exploded with anger. "Are you even a real healer? You can't tell the difference between pollution and an injury." He turned to the woman and growled, "Let's go. No point wasting time here. Jia must have been bribed or cursed." Chapter 549, Betrayal Among Thieves. Saul wasn't the least bit upset by the muscle-bound male wizard's tone. Instead, he turned to speak with the female wizard, who seemed at least capable of a proper conversation. "Why do you think it's pollution and not just an injury?" The female wizard looked flustered. She was stumbling over her words as she tried to calm the irritable man who looked ready to storm off, and at the same time, pitifully tried to explain things to Saul. "Half a year ago, we were chasing a water-element magic creature and ended up entering an underground river. But we got separated shortly after. I eventually found him and we managed to escape together. But once we got home, I suddenly discovered he'd already been back for some time. And..." She paused, her face growing paler at the memory. "And there was another me with him." That's when I realized the person I was with might have been a fake, and the one at his side was probably a fake too. Can they take on the form of other people? Saul asked thoughtfully. I've at least heard of 3 types of entities with that ability. So how did you figure out who was real and who was? The female wizard tilted her head upward. Her neck was slender and pale. We go adventuring together often and are very familiar with each other's mental power. At first, we were too tense to notice anything off. But once we calmed down and really focused, we figured out who was real. As soon as the 2 fakes were exposed, they attacked us. He tried to protect me and ended up with both of them clinging to his arm. She glanced gratefully at the male wizard, which seemed to calm him down a little. We barely managed to kill the 2 imposters, but ever since then, his arm has had these 2 red marks. No healing magic works on them and they've only been spreading. He's also grown more and more irritable. That's why I suspect it's pollution, not an injury. By this point, Saul had a general idea of what was going on. I see, so you've already tried everything you can think of. Now you're hopping, I'll give it a shot. Yes, the witch nodded, eyes filled with unshakable gloom. Saul leaned back, draping his arms over the chair's armrests. Then I take it, you've brought payment. You're asking about payment before you even know if you can fix it. The male wizard glared at Saul. I'm not saying I can fix it, Saul replied, resting his chin on his hand. If you want my help, be prepared to pay for it first. I'm not giving you 2 a chance to skip out. Skip out? The 2 looked confused, but they more or less grasped what he meant. Our last mission ended badly, and we used up what we had, clearing pollution. We don't have many magic crystals left. Other rare materials are acceptable too, Saul said coldly. We don't really have those. Then if you don't have 3,000 magic crystals, kindly see yourselves out. The male wizard looked about ready to explode at the number, but Saul didn't give them a chance to bargain. He had the ice wolves turn around immediately, leaving only 1 sentence behind. Come back when you've got something of equal value. Back at the wizard tower, the old witch and the steward were on the 1st floor. Saul briefly explained the situation, and the old witch immediately flung herself backward dramatically. 3,000, are you robbing people now? Saul paused mid-step, then suddenly changed direction and walked up to the now nearly 1.4-meter tall old witch. She craned her neck to look up at him. Why are you getting so close? I want to ask you for a favor. No time. 300 magic crystals. Ha, you've got some nerve. You really think I won't smack you? What? On the 3rd day, little Algie came to report. That aggressive muscle wizard and the tearful wizard had returned. They brought the magic crystals. Saul asked. Little Algie tilted his head. Didn't understand. Saul chuckled, bent down to tuck little Algie into his pocket, and once again rode the wolf carriage to the lakeside. Same place, same people. The male wizard's eyes were bloodshot. He looked even more volatile than before. The pale-faced female wizard clutched a small pouch tightly in her hand. We don't have 3,000 crystals, she said softly, glancing down at the pouch, her face filled with reluctance. But this magical artifact, we obtained it 3 years ago. It should know it must be worth 3,000. Let me see it. The female wizard held the pouch close to her chest. Relax, just open the bag and show me. I won't take it until after the cleansing is done. The female wizard gave him a look of gratitude and quickly loosened the drawstring. She tugged open the taut mouth of the pouch, letting Saul get a clear look inside. Because the pouch was so small, Saul initially thought it had a space compression formation. But once he saw the item inside, he realized the magical artifact itself was simply tiny. Inside the bag was a red spinning top, about the size of a fingertip. It's definitely an artifact, but what does it do? The female wizard patiently explained, "I don't know its real name, but I call it the thunderstorm top. If you channel your mental power into it and spin it clockwise, it releases lightning. If you spin it counterclockwise, it releases gales. Then shouldn't it be called the wind and thunder top?" Saul's sudden quip caught the female wizard off guard. She blanked out for a moment, then remembered what she wanted to say. "Ooh, there's a rumor that if you can spin it clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time, you'll summon a catastrophic storm." At first, Saul wasn't too impressed with the two basic functions, but that last bit of lore piqued his interest. If it really could summon a disaster-level storm, then this artifact was far from ordinary. 3,000 crystals, absolutely worth it. Saul jumped down from the carriage and approached the male wizard. Perhaps the female wizard had talked him down, because today he stayed silent. Still, the look in his eyes made it clear he was barely holding back. "I'm going to cleanse your pollution now. Don't move." The muscles on the male wizard's face twitched, but he held back and nodded. But as Saul stepped down from the wolf carriage and slowly approached, the man's eyes shifted from impatient to serious. By the time Saul reached him, the man had already removed his robe, revealing a pair of arms marked with large red blotches. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual, but up close, the red marks clearly formed the shape of two people clinging to his arms. And if you stared at them long enough, they moved. The two silhouettes had been hugging his arms tightly, seemingly chewing on his skin. But little by little, their heads turned, from facing away from Saul to profile, then bit by bit, fully turning to face him. They were now staring straight at Saul. But just as Saul was focused on studying the red marks, the male wizard's face, ignored until now, began to morph. His features slowly stretched, like someone was forcibly tugging on his skin. His eyes elongated and widened, his nose flattened, and his mouth became a massive void. Then he lunged, aiming to bite Saul's skull. But at that very moment, a shadow sprang out from behind Saul. It started small and thin, but within a second it had grown into a full-sized figure. 8 spider legs sprouted from its lower half, each like a short spear, lunging straight for the morphing wizard's head. The wizard had intended to ambush Saul, only to be ambushed himself. Luckily, he hadn't come unprepared. The 2 red humanoid marks on his arms tore away with a SHRR rip, lower halves still connected by threads of flesh, upper halves fully turned, jaws wide open as they lunged at Saul. At the same time, the female wizard behind Saul pulled out the thunderstorm top, the one meant to be payment, and spun it hard clockwise in her palm. The top had just begun to spin when a silver flash burst from Saul's body, rushing toward the woman. In the blink of an eye, it crashed into her with a brutal headbutt, sending her flying. The top clattered to the ground, emitting only a few tiny sparks of lightning. The female wizard didn't even know what hit her. Everyone else was using magic, but you had to go for a physical tackle. Shameless. Clutching her dented chest and coughing up blood, she struggled to lift her head, only to see the silver figure already picking up the thunderstorm top from the ground. And not far away, Saul had just cleaved the ambushing male wizard clean in half with a strike of his black blade. The bisected corpse now hung like skewered meat on 2 spider legs. As for the 2 red silhouettes, they had vanished without a trace. Chapter 550, Black Eats Black Eats Black. Saul tossed the male wizard's corpse to him to play with. He'd promised her earlier that he'd take her out to have some fun when there was time. And 8 spider legs hadn't had a chance to see use since their upgrade. She couldn't bear to ruin the male wizard's corpse right away, and instead, like Saul in the morgue, cheerfully picked through the useful materials. Herman handed the thunderstorm top to Saul. Saul took it, sensing the mental imprint the wizard had left on it. With his formidable mental power, he directly and forcefully wiped it away. But he didn't immediately imprint it with his own mental signature. Instead, he tossed it into the storage device without a second thought. Then, step by step, he walked over to the female wizard who had been knocked 5 meters away. Her face paled as what little color remained drained away. "Since I've taken your payment, let me take a look at your pollution." He spoke with no context or preamble, yet the female wizard's eyes widened in shock. "So you really did notice," she murmured, blood still trickling from the corner of her mouth, stunned. Saul crouched down and grabbed her collar, yanking her face close to his. "Although I haven't had this side job for long, I'm fairly experienced." He raised his other hand and slowly traced her face until he reached her left eye. "This eye of yours is polluted," Saul said. His thumb suddenly transformed into a small tentacle, slithering into the gap between her eyeball and eyelid. The wizard's eyes opened wide with terror. She tried to escape, but found she couldn't move at all. Before long, her left eye shriveled like a dried-up tadpole. With a slight tilt of her head, the eyeball, still connected by nerves, slipped from its socket. Only then did Saul retract the tentacle, returning it to the shape of a thumb. The wizard reached up blankly to touch her eye socket, then suddenly broke into a joyful smile. "It's really gone." She looked at Saul with a mix of gratitude and regret. "I'm sorry, Dr. Saul. Actually, someone ordered us to test you. I had no choice but to accept their demand in exchange for treatment. I'm really, truly sorry. I hope you can forgive me." Tears welled up in her remaining eye, so full they looked ready to fall with the slightest flutter of her lashes. If you ignored the withered eyeball, she was actually quite pretty. She had that fragile, obedient look. Saul looked into her remaining eye, pale, beautiful. Her pupils dilated slightly. Her small, bloodless lips parted ever so gently. "Fragile. Crack." As Saul uttered the final word, his hand, gripping her neck, suddenly tightened. He snapped her neck. The wizard convulsed once. Tears and blood ran down her face together. Saul let go, allowing her corpse to fall. Then he waited a while longer to make sure there was no chance of her reanimating. Only then did he allow and to string up the female wizard as well, preparing to bring her back to the wizard tower without wasting a scrap. Herman seemed a little regretful. "Master, don't you want to know who sent them to test you? Small fry like these probably only know lies anyway." And hung the body on the back of the wolf-drawn carriage. Previously, to transport materials provided by Jiajiagu, Saul had added a wagon bed to the back of the wolf cart. It now made the perfect container for enemy corpses. The two consciousnesses had to return to the diary. Otherwise, when they passed the frozen Lake Rhine, the powerful forces within would drag them to the bottom. They'd need Saul to fish them out with little algae and thaw them. Before heading back, and grinned mischievously. "Just now, I thought the master might actually take that wizard in." Herman let out a hearty laugh. "Even if she was forced to test you, she didn't hold back. If anyone else had been tested like that, they might already be dead." Saul stored the two consciousnesses, turned, and climbed into the wolf cart. Just before snapping the reins, he muttered to himself. "True, it was a test, but there was no mercy. If I had died, it would have meant I was weak, worthless, not a threat. If I survived, I'd likely kill them both, which means someone else will come to assess the outcome of the test. Who would go to such lengths, using such roundabout means to test me, and even sacrifice a powerful magic tool?" As the wolf cart rolled forward, Saul opened his hand. The red top appeared in his palm. Thunderstorm top so dramatic, might as well call it red alert. Far from Lake Rhine, a man stood on a small hilltop, just lowering a spyglass from his eye. It wasn't the kind of spyglass used by sailors. There were no lenses. At the front end of the cylinder was a single eyeball, bloodshot and bulging, as if it might explode at any moment. Very cautious and ruthless too, he held back nothing, the man said, rotating the strange spyglass in his hands, but spotting the one with pollution at a glance. That takes real skill. Though Gorsa backing him is a problem, looks like I'll need to quietly abduct him instead. The man decided to return for now and prepare for his second move. In the meantime, I should spread rumors that he casually kills those who come to him for help. That way, people won't dare approach him so easily. That won't do. A hoarse female voice suddenly rang out behind him. The man's heart jumped. Without looking back, he shot into the air like a firework. Only once airborne did he fling a burning net behind him. But before he could check whether he'd caught anything, the air around him suddenly solidified. The man, mid-flight, froze like a specimen suspended in glass. At that moment, a short figure wearing a massive mask appeared before him. Saul said it himself, cutting off income is as good as murder, and you, a mere first-rank wizard, dare try to assassinate me. The masked old witch growled fiercely. The man was stunned. No one had told him there was a second-rank wizard in the Purity Wizard Tower. Who sent you to test Saul? The air pinning his head loosened slightly. Clearly, the old witch wanted an answer. But the man remained silent. HMPH, what's there to hide? Your master sent you to test a no-name first-rank wizard. Clearly, he's already polluted and on the brink of death. I suggest you surrender before you waste your life for nothing. Still, the man didn't move. His eyeballs twitched faintly, as if still calculating how to escape. Annoying. The old witch prepared to haul him back and hand him over to Saul. After all, aside from skinning people, she wasn't good at interrogation. But just as she was about to bundle him up, the man's head suddenly exploded with a pop. The old witch quickly stepped back to avoid the blast. She scanned the surroundings warily, but sensed no magical or mental fluctuations. Doesn't feel like anyone else is nearby. Could this be some kind of delayed suicide spell? Regardless, the prisoner had exploded right in front of her, embarrassing to say the least. Saul had sent her to scout for observers or stalkers while he worked on the treatments. If she found any, she was supposed to bring back a live one to the tower. But now that she only had a corpse, she'd only be entitled to half the promised 300 magic crystals. Damn it, what a pain. Left with no other choice, the old witch grumbled all the way back, dragging the body behind her. Chapter 551, The Mastermind Behind the Scenes. Saul wasn't surprised to see that the old witch had only returned with a corpse. Looks like there's a big shot behind this guy. Otherwise, even you wouldn't have failed to catch one alive. His words made the old witch feel a little better. This brat sure knows how to be polite. No, wait, he's just a smooth-talking little liar, she grumbled inwardly. The two I caught didn't know anything either. Either the person behind them is hiding too well, or the real mastermind doesn't need to get involved directly. The old witch glared at Saul with her large, bulbous eyes. Fine, I'll spell it out. Saul took out a spinning top from his storage. It had just been renamed Red Alert. Whoever's behind them is likely a third-rank wizard, or a particularly influential second-rank wizard. The first time they came, I deliberately quoted an exorbitant price, but they came back the very next day with this rare magical tool and claimed it was their own. I seriously doubt that. It's more likely that whoever's backing them prepared it. Now, it's a matter of figuring out who's more likely to be testing me. No need to figure it out. The old witch's expression changed the moment she saw the top. She snatched it from Saul's hand and held it up to her face. They're from the Wind Sprite faction. I've seen this top there before. Wind Sprite. The old witch's face was at first twisted in rage, but then slowly stretched into a grin. Ha 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 ha, I knew it. That crazy woman must have been seriously polluted. She tossed the top back into Saul's lap. HMPH. No wonder people haven't been coming to see me lately. Looks like she's gotten herself into big trouble. She thought to herself, if the wind sprite comes here personally, should I leave this place first? But then she stole a glance at Saul, who was staring thoughtfully at the top, and shook her head inwardly again. No, that wouldn't work. The pollution in me hasn't been resolved yet, and my current appearance and magic signature have changed completely. If I stick close to this brat and don't show my face, maybe I'll actually be safer. At that moment, Saul had already overlaid his mental energy on red alert, setting the top spinning slowly on the table. As it spun, intricate rune formations appeared on its surface. The faster he twisted it, the more those formations morphed, visually transforming into flowing lines. At the same time, Saul felt a surge of lightning magic gathering at his fingertips. He didn't release the energy, instead revering the spin. This time, the lightning morphed into wind. Saul extended a finger, sensing the cutting force. The wind wasn't fully developed yet, so it couldn't break his skin. How do you make a top spin clockwise and counterclockwise at the same time? After thinking for a moment, Saul pulled a small mirror from a pile of junk and propped it up on the table. He then positioned the top in front of the mirror and started spinning it slowly. Outside the mirror, the top spun clockwise. Within the mirror, it spun counterclockwise. All eyes immediately focused on Saul. But the magical energy in the air didn't change in the slightest. Saul's fingers slowly stopped twisting. Then he gave it a firm spin. The top danced rapidly across the smooth tabletop. Yet Saul only felt the lightning power brewing inside, waiting for his mental energy to activate it and let it explode. He pressed a finger down, stopping the top. No good. He stowed the top away. The mirror can show both clockwise and counterclockwise motion simultaneously, but the top inside the mirror has no power. It can't generate the catastrophic storm. The old witch had no interest in how the top worked. Even though she decided to stay for now, she couldn't stop worrying that the wind sprite might come knocking. Stop messing with your little trophy. Aren't you afraid the wind sprite will come straight to you and demand it back? But Saul didn't think the wind sprite would come at all. If you hadn't recognized who the top belonged to, I wouldn't have been able to confirm that she's the one behind it. If she shows up to claim it herself, she'll be exposing the fact that she may be severely polluted. And she can't send too many people either. Doing so would be the same as coming by herself. And if it's just another second rank on their own, well, isn't that why you are here? The old witch was coaxed into a good mood and walked away, grinning. Saul returned to the first basement level. Anne and Herman just had their first real combat exercise, but even working together, they could only barely match a first-rank wizard. I had to step in to finish the kill. You protected both their soul bodies and their enemy. Camus immediately pinpointed the core issue. Exactly. So we need a one-way output shield. Saul paused and then chose another term, or call it a protective membrane. With the homunculus magic modification project stalled due to a lack of progress, Saul simply switched gears to refresh his mind with a different subject. Today I collected 3 fresh first-rank corpses. We can finally begin testing modifications for merging flesh and soul into the perfect body. Corpses of first-rank wizards weren't easy to come by. Especially for someone new to the borderland like Saul, it wasn't a good idea to go around killing people himself, or openly collecting such corpses. Camus didn't react. Whether Saul succeeded or failed, she showed no emotion. She only seemed interested in the thought process itself. Saul didn't mind. In fact, he treated Camus like a low-tier diary, one that can't help but point out your mistakes. The experiments proceeded in silence. Anatomy and material extraction were now tasks and could handle. Herman assisted her. Saul focused on the formulas he'd previously developed, writing them on the wall, then annotating his thoughts beneath each one. This method helped him spot errors and omissions in his logic. Camus also stared at the wall. The moment Saul stopped writing, her gaze turned to him. "These formulas don't match you." "Huh?" Saul was momentarily stunned, not understanding what she meant. But when he looked down at his hands, realization struck. "Of course, my body has already gone through 2 rounds of physical wizardry modification. The foundation for this experiment should be me, not the old witch's so-called perfect body." A sudden burst of insight sent chills racing across his skin. He grabbed a pen and began frantically revising the equations on the wall. He even paused midway to extract samples of his own tissue for testing. This time, he finally found the key problem. "I've already completed the basic part of merging flesh and soul. The next step is deepening that integration, but the base flesh component still isn't up to standard." In truth, the flesh of his former third-rank apprentice self was no longer sufficient to meet the physical baseline for full wizard-level body modification. Also, while the old witch's perfect body does incorporate various racial advantages, it didn't enhance magical capacity. Her focus seems to be on magical agility and physical recovery rate. "If I want to design a new plan tailored for myself, I'll need to greatly increase its magical potential." And if magical potential needed to be increased, it had to be a drastic improvement. Once again, Saul found himself face to face with his century-long dilemma. What do you do if you don't have enough magic talent? But unlike before, he was no longer that powerless little apprentice who had to grind with a diary just to survive. Chapter 552, Magic Reservoir Pool. In a short amount of time, Saul came up with several ways to increase his magic. But none of them could be considered scalable. The last time Saul gained a significant amount of magic was in the Elven Valley, when he received the final gift of the half-elf. That surge of pure magic had saved him years of effort in accumulating energy, and allowed him to successfully advance to a true wizard. If he hadn't become a true wizard, he likely wouldn't have survived the rebellion in the Wizard Tower. But now, without a gift from the heavens, Saul could only rely on himself to find a way to increase his magic. Purely relying on meditation was clearly not enough. "Right now, the method I can think of to increase my magic is to collect various materials rich in magic, refine them, and then absorb the energy. But the problem with this method is that the refinement is never complete. Impurities accumulate inside the body. Over time, I'd have to find a way to cleanse them, otherwise it would become a huge risk." "You could build a magic reservoir pool," Camus suddenly said. "A magic reservoir pool, what's that?" Saul had never heard the name before. Though the words themselves were easy enough to understand, he knew that anything Camus specifically proposed wouldn't be so simple. A magic reservoir pool involves collecting highly magical materials, then going through 4 steps, catalyzing, refining, filtering, and collecting, to extract purer magic. At first glance, the method sounded pretty much the same as what Saul had already thought of. But he didn't say anything. He simply remained quiet watching Camus. Every step in building a magic reservoir pool is crucial, but the most critical is the 3rd step, filtering. The filter you choose determines how much pollution is removed from the extracted magic. Some people call this pollution distortion value. Camus's voice, like her mood, remained calm and steady, like she was reading from a manual. "The best filter material is a living wizard. This kind of knowledge probably isn't allowed to be shared, is it?" Camus didn't answer. She simply stared at Saul like a sculpture. Saul leaned against the lab bench, slowly rotating the beaker in his hand. "Go on, let's hear it." Saul built a magic reservoir pool at the top of the Wizard Tower. The entire pool was constructed using the Wizard Tower's own materials. The basin was cylindrical, 2 meters tall and 1 meter in diameter. Outside the magic reservoir pool, he built a canopy to block sunlight and installed a light-focusing apparatus. Depending on the materials being processed, it could simulate different environmental conditions. Thanks to magic, the main construction of the magic reservoir pool took less than half a month to complete. Next came the preparation of various materials, catalysts, and suitable filtering materials. Once the main structure was complete, Saul left Herman behind to watch over the wizard tower while he took the others and went out. At the moment, the Purity Wizard Tower had entered a stage of stable growth. Coupled with the magic-restricted Rhine Lake surrounding it, Saul could leave with peace of mind for a while. This time, he was heading to a location provided by the old witch. She claimed to have seen quicksand termites there. The queen of the quicksand termites secreted a substance known in the wizarding world as obsidian amber. It was a highly effective catalyst, and its applications were quite broad. In the past, when Saul worked as the second storage hall's manager, he had even sold some of it. After leaving the wizard tower, he didn't bring along the quicksand termite queen, since it was fragile and had to live in a complex, environmentally regulated device. And the device itself was too delicate, vulnerable to jolts and shocks, making it impossible to bring on the road. Fortunately, he still had some obsidian amber left. But for a large-scale experimental setup like the magic reservoir pool, that little bit was nowhere near enough. He needed far more obsidian amber, and preferably a sustainable source. So he planned to follow the old witch's clue to locate a quicksand termite colony, then move the queen and all her offspring outside Rhine Lake. Meanwhile, the old witch would prepare the termite nest outside the wizard tower in advance. When Saul returned, they could move the entire colony in immediately. She had proposed this herself, on the condition that she received a share of the obsidian amber the queen produced. Naturally, Saul had no objection. In fact, he was even thinking of stationing someone near the nest for safekeeping. If that person turned out to be the old witch herself, even better. The place where she had once seen the quicksand termites wasn't in the desert, but, strangely enough, in a forest near a settlement. The forest wasn't large, not even covering half a mountainside, but the vegetation inside was unnaturally lush and tall. People walking through it felt as small as ants. So the locals had taken to calling it the Survivor's Ancient Grove. Most of the borderland had little to no population. Some places were only home to powerful, solitary wizards or other strong beings. Communities were extremely rare. Before entering the Survivor's Ancient Grove, Saul decided to check out the nearby settlement to gather information. This settlement wasn't large either, but was surrounded by tall stone walls. The walls looked old, the bricks were weathered, and several of the enchanted runes engraved on them had already failed, now just hanging there for show. To the north was a mountain. To the south was the Survivor's Ancient Grove. The east and west sides had no barriers, just a road weathered by time, leading to the base of the wall before forking and skirting around it. Sunlight poured down without mercy. Though it was already autumn, the heat still carried the force of midsummer. Saul walked to the fork in the road. The path to the settlement was overgrown with weeds, suggesting few people traveled it regularly. As Saul debated whether to knock on the door or just fly in, a clatter of irregular metal rattling from a distance caught his attention. 7 raggedly dressed commoners emerged from the Survivor's Ancient Grove, walking in a line. They all had shackles around their ankles. Each of their left feet was chained to a shared iron fetter. Each of their right feet was chained to another. All 7 had black cloths covering their eyes. The first in line held a lantern. The lantern's light was so faint it was nearly invisible under the harsh sun. A bunch of blindfolded people, all chained together, but one of them is still carrying a lantern. Saul stood still, watching them slowly emerge from the woods, bare feet pressing from grass to dirt, then walking past him. Their trousers were rolled up to the knees, and their legs down to their toes were caked in mud. When the last of them passed by, Saul began following behind. The fork in the road was more than 100 meters from a door-sized opening in the wall. When the blindfolded leader neared the closed beechwood gate, the lantern in his hand suddenly sputtered and went out. He stopped immediately. The rest of the group halted in practiced unison. Then the gate silently opened a crack. Inside was pitch black, as if sunlight couldn't reach within the settlement. A massive hand gripped the door and pushed it wider, just enough for one person to pass through. The lantern's light reignited. The 7 blindfolded people resumed walking, stepping with eerie precision, right foot first, then left. Saul still brought up the rear, even matching his footsteps to theirs. He slipped through the door. Looking up, he saw a large, triangular-shaped head peeking around the edge of the gate. Its 2 orange-yellow eyes were as big as tabletops. One hand gripped the side of the door, the other rested atop the doorframe. It didn't look at Saul. Its murky pupils followed the 7 figures on the ground as they slowly walked inside. Gulp! Saul could have sworn he heard it swallow. The monster behind the door could no longer resist. One hand let go of the gate and reached for the last person in line. It grabbed the man's upper body, trying to lift him up. But just as its arm rose, the shackles binding the 7 suddenly rattled loud and chaotic. The man being grabbed was clearly terrified. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He just trembled, frantically shaking his legs to make the chains clink louder. Crack! Suddenly, a long whip lashed out from the darkness and struck the monster hard on the head. "Don't touch my goods!" a furious old voice shouted. Chapter 553, The Barbarian's Ritual. The monstrous creature with a giant head and massive hands shrank back in fear behind the door. Once everyone had entered, it closed the door behind them. Saul saw that, while the monster had a disproportionately large head and palms, its torso and lower body were much smaller. When it shrank back behind the door, it could only prop itself up against the wall or the door to avoid collapsing. "Who are you?" an old man's voice rang out. Saul turned his head and saw that across the passage, behind another large door, stood an old man. His upper body was intact, and he glared at Saul with arrogant authority. But his lower body was entirely buried inside a man-sized clay flower pot, as if he had been planted in the soil. "I'm just passing by. Wanted to come in and rest for the night. Would that be all right?" The old man scrutinized Saul. His voice remained rigid and unyielding. "Do you have a referral?" "A referral?" Saul was taken aback. "No referral, no entry. This settlement houses a second-rank shaman. Don't even think about forcing your way in." Such a small settlement actually had a second rank. Saul had no intention of recklessly clashing with a second rank. As he hesitated, considering whether to forego gathering information and instead go straight to the survivor's ancient grove, another voice suddenly spoke up beside the old man. "I'll be his referral, Tilda." Kismet strolled out from behind the door, hands behind his back, smiling warmly. Saul's pupils narrowed, but he said nothing. The flower-pot old man looked at Kismet with suspicion. This newcomer radiated the magical aura of a first-rank wizard. "You really know him?" Kismet's smile remained unchanged. "Though it's a surprise to meet him here, he's my younger brother. How could I not know him?" "Your brother?" The old man looked skeptically from Saul to Kismet. "You two don't look alike at all." Kismet came over and casually slung an arm over Saul's shoulder. "Are you really judging wizard siblings by appearance? What, you think we don't deserve body modifications?" "HMPH, fine, I won't ask." Go in then. Clearly unwilling to waste time arguing, the old man accepted the claim at face value. Once they passed through the walled corridor, Saul brushed Kismet's hand off his shoulder. Weren't you off to escaper? What are you scheming now, running back here? Kismet clutched his chest with a wounded expression. I heard my master brother had arrived in the borderland. I rushed here secretly, hoping to finally give you the third golden page I once promised. Saul crossed his arms. Oh, then do you know where I live now? Of course. The name of the Purity Wizard Tower is beginning to spread in the borderland. In fact, just being acknowledged by Clark gave your tower a huge boost in reputation. Kismet's grin instantly returned. Hef, you know where I live, but came here to find me instead. Kismet, Saul was just about to press him for the golden page when a young boy suddenly ran toward them. He was nearly in front of Saul when a tall, thin man lunged and tackled him to the ground. The boy, his face twisted in rage, immediately tried to elbow the adult, pinning him down. But just then, a pair of rough, calloused hands clamped down on him. The boy looked up and was stunned when he saw a third man. He stopped struggling. The man holding the boy's arms, his face unshaven and rough, looked up and shouted to those rushing over behind him, I've got him. Hurry. Two other men, better dressed in brighter clothes, ran over and crouched near the boy's feet. One held his ankles, while the other, without hesitation, drove nails into the soles of the boy's feet using a hammer. Ahhhh. The boy, who looked to be about 11 or 12, couldn't bear the pain. He screamed, his eyes locked on the stubbled man pinning him down. Tears quickly began to fall. Once both his feet were nailed, they were wrapped in dark yellow bandages. The man then hoisted the boy onto his shoulder and carried him away. Nails through the feet, what kind of ritual is that? Kismet chuckled, barbarian custom. Just then, a wizard apprentice passed by. Upon hearing their comment, he instinctively glared at them, but then realized they were both first-rank wizards. He immediately lowered his head and acted as if he didn't exist. Saul, however, had noticed the apprentice's reaction. He stroked his chin and mused. Seems this ritual might also be related to the wizards. He closed his eyes to recall. Those 7 men he saw before entering this place, the ones with blindfolds, did they have holes in their feet? When he heard outsiders refer to the solemn ritual of the settlement as a barbarian custom, the wizard apprentice named Nick was furious. But what infuriated him even more was that he had no choice but to lower his head in the presence of 2 official wizards and pretend to be invisible. He had been stuck as a third-rank apprentice for 20 years, with no hope of advancement. But after coming here, he felt the bottleneck he once thought unbreakable begin to loosen. To him, this ritual was sacred and profound. How could he allow such comments to go unpunished? Though he had no power to confront 2 first-rank wizards, he could report them. And he would report them to the most powerful person in the settlement, the second-rank wizard, their grand shaman, Lord Monty. Seething with indignation and carrying a mix of other, murky emotions, Nick took the opportunity during a routine report to mention the incident. That's how it is, Lord Grand Shaman. Nick knelt on the ground, feeling no shame. These outside wizards enjoy all the benefits you bestow, yet still mock your rituals. They have no gratitude at all. I believe they need to be properly taught a lesson. However, while Nick babbled on, the Grand Shaman across from him didn't even glance his way. Monty was focused on inspecting the wooden rack, turning slowly above a charcoal fire. A person was strapped to the rack, their body rotating over the heat for even roasting. Their skin had turned a deep reddish black, but their chests still moved faintly. They were alive. Suddenly, a drop of milky white fluid slid from the tightly shut eye of the bound figure. The Grand Shaman's eyes lit up. He immediately reached out and collected the droplet into a bottle. Excellent concentration. The Grand Shaman admired it for a moment. When he turned back, he saw that the person on the rack had already died. Another one dead. He frowned slightly, then finally turned to Nick and said, "Buy more slaves on your next trip. Now's the peak production season. I don't want any issues with the meat nest. It's a simple task." He didn't mention the two wizards Nick had tattled on. Clearly, he didn't care at all. "Yes, my lord." Nick bowed even lower and dared not speak again. After the apprentice left, a woman with a swollen belly emerged from the rear building. Her face glowed with joy as she gently caressed her abdomen with a smile. She saw the dead body on the roasting rack and looked at it with disdain. Ordinary people just don't last long enough. Their output is too low. The Grand Shaman asked knowingly, "What, you still want to use apprentices for the meat nest?" The woman curled her lip. "Why not? What's the real difference between apprentices and common folk anyway?" The implication was clear. She was thinking of using wizards as material for the meat nest. Though he was a second rank, the Grand Shaman was still hesitant about attacking true wizards. If anyone found out, he could become the public enemy of the borderland. He waved a hand to have the corpse thrown out of the room and said nothing further on the subject. Though the woman looked dissatisfied, she dared not push too far before a second rank. Her belly suddenly twitched, and she turned pale with pain. But once the wave of agony passed, her smile returned. She resumed stroking her stomach gently. "Just a year or two more, and it will descend." She gazed at her belly with burning eyes, not with a mother's tenderness, but a fanatical reverence. The Grand Shaman also stared at her stomach, but unlike the woman's devotion, his fiery gaze contained a thread of greed. "Just a year or two more." Chapter 554, Soul Reading Candle. This settlement wasn't large. Saul only walked a few steps before he saw the same people he had glimpsed before entering. They were being led into an underground passage. The chains on their feet had been removed, but their eyes remained blindfolded. This time, he noticed that the last person also had a hole in the sole of their foot. The wound had long since healed, but there was still a faint reddish stain on the sole, as if blood had just recently flowed. Saul watched those people disappear into the tunnel without turning his head. What are these people doing? Why do they come back from outside covered in mud? Kismet still didn't answer directly, only saying, "It's just the norm here." He then turned the question back on Saul. "You came because of the rumors about quicksand termites, didn't you?" The offhanded way Kismet asked this made Saul's heart sink. Could it be that a lot of people already knew about the quicksand termites? Then how could he possibly steal the entire termite nest and bring it back in secret? Wait, those words coming out of Kismet's mouth. Saul abruptly looked up, and sure enough, Kismet's eyes were squinting from laughter. "It's actually a scam. What appeared in Survivor's ancient grove wasn't the quicksand termite at all, but a look-alike species called the humpback termite. Totally different abilities." A scam, Saul stared at Kismet. Kismet's smile slowly faded. He pointed to his own nose, puffed out his cheeks, and said, "Just because it's a scam doesn't mean I made it up right." Thinking about how Kismet had helped him get in here earlier, Saul ultimately withdrew his suspicious gaze. But deep down, he really wanted to nod. Kismet tugged on Saul's arm. Come on. Standing here is pointless. There may not be quicksand termites, but there are plenty of other good things." Other good things? Saul thought for a moment and didn't leave right away. Getting into this settlement required a referral, so it probably held some rare and valuable magic materials. Things that Jaya-Jiagu, the traveling merchant, would have a hard time collecting for him. If he could establish a supply channel here, it wouldn't be bad, just a bit far. Saul followed Kismet down a narrow path. There were many ordinary people here, but most of them were gaunt and sallow-faced. Occasionally he spotted a few wizard apprentices and a small number of true wizards, but they all came and went in a hurry. After observing for a while, Saul noticed that many of the wizards and apprentices were heading in the same direction as them. It was just that their pace was quicker, so one by one they passed them and walked ahead. And so, following the trickling stream of people, Saul and Kismet arrived at what looked from the outside like an ordinary one-story house. Only upon entering did Saul realize that the house extended downward at a slant. At the entrance, Kismet also presented something. Apparently, you needed a pass to enter this place too. The two of them descended dozens of steps and entered a hall obscured by layers of gauzy curtains. Behind the veils, vague silhouettes of people could be seen. When someone hurriedly passed them, lifting the veil and stepping inside, Saul immediately felt a wave of heat rush out from the gap. It was like a tongue of fire from a furnace, suddenly licking his cheek. Strange and yet kind of familiar. Kismet thought for a moment. You might recognize the scent, but it's not the same thing at all. With that, Kismet ducked inside first. Saul stared at the red and purple veils in front of him, feeling like this place didn't seem like a market for exchanging magic materials. Could it be that this place is actually? A certain possibility crossed Saul's mind. He glanced at his diary, but it showed no signs of danger, so in the end, he lifted the veil and stepped in. The moment he entered, Saul was met with a sea of glistening, naked flesh. There were both wizards and ordinary people. The ordinary people, regardless of gender, were all draped in sheer gauze. As they walked, the fabric occasionally fluttered, transforming half-concealment into full exposure. They were all exceptionally good-looking, with well-proportioned bodies, features that would make any regular person envious. Kismet had actually brought him here, and said this was a good place. Though to be fair, it wasn't necessarily a bad place. Still, shouldn't he be taking this a little more seriously? At that moment, a beautiful young woman dressed in white gauze walked up and respectfully asked, "Sirs, please come inside. Would you like to rest in the main hall or go to a private room?" Saul looked the beauty up and down, from head to toe and back from toe to head. Kismet said nothing beside him. Saul turned to him. "They're all magic constructs." "Yes, all nearing the end of their lifespan, used for apprentices to practice on." Hearing Kismet's words, the young woman looked slightly uneasy, but her face still bore a flawlessly curved smile. As if her eyes and her mouth didn't even belong to the same person. Saul had just finished a thorough inspection and had already confirmed that she was biologically under 30 years old, but had less than 2 years of life remaining. Most likely, aside from those lightly trembling eyes, her entire body had been modified. Saul hadn't been interested to begin with. Now, he had even less mood for this. "Do you sell anything else here?" The girl in white gauze quickly replied, "Since it's your first visit, sir, allow me to inform you, at Pandading, we only sell one item." She took a small cylinder from the sash at her waist. Holding it delicately between her middle finger and thumb, she popped off the lid, then raised her arm to present its contents to Saul. "This is our only product, the soul-reading candle." Saul didn't take the candle right away. Instead, he scanned the hall again. Only now did he notice that every wizard and apprentice here had a seemingly ordinary candle placed in front of them. Even those cradling beauties in their arms had no mind for carnal pleasures. Their eyes were fixed blankly on the candles before them, taking deep breaths now and then. Their expressions were blissful. These wizards, in such a chaotic and crowded place, had completely let down their guard and allowed themselves to fall into this dazed state. Something was off. Saul used messaging spell to ask Kismet, "So this is the true nature of the scam you mentioned?" Kismet's eyes glinted with amusement. He responded with messaging spell as well. "Smart. In Survivor's ancient grove, they raise humpback termites. These termites secrete a special acid when they bite. It paralyzes the body but leaves the mind perfectly clear. The victims remain fully conscious as they're slowly dismembered and offered to the termite queen at the heart of the nest. The local great wizard, Monty, figured out how to detoxify the acid, then dilute and solidify it to create the soul-reading candle. When wizards and apprentices inhale the scent, their brains enter a state of extreme excitation. In this state, whether learning new spells or deciphering obscure runes, everything becomes much easier. It also temporarily enhances meditation. Kismet gestured subtly with his chin. That's why so many of the people here are those stuck at some bottleneck, unable to advance. They treat panditing as their last hope of promotion. Of course, he added with a shrug, it's just a bit pricey. Chapter 555, The Abandoned Bull. So the only downside is that it's expensive. Saul sneered inwardly and continued transmitting his voice. If you absorb too much, will it kill you? Kismet raised his eyebrows. Why would you think that? Then is it addictive? While that state of mental clarity and heightened awareness is indeed quite captivating, if you're asking whether it has any addictive drug-like effects, then no, it doesn't. No side effects at all. Saul found that hard to believe, especially since the words were coming from the mouth of a schemer and a notorious liar. Kismet saw the suspicion flickering again in Saul's eyes and said helplessly, the termite acid from the humpback termites is already filtered through ordinary people before extraction. The kind we give to outside wizards is completely non-toxic and diluted several times over. He took the candle from the girl, who had been holding it up for quite a while, handed her a magic crystal, and then stuffed the candle directly into Saul's coat pocket. Try it yourself, then you'll know whether it kills or not. He said this one out loud. The girl next to them was so startled that she immediately shrank back a little. Saul and Kismet stood by the hall entrance until the next guest walked in. Then they followed the girl to a random table and sat down. Kismet whispered something to the girl. She looked a little surprised but still nodded and trotted off. Once there was no one else nearby, Saul stretched out his hand toward Kismet and said bluntly, you said a golden page was left in the borderland. We're in the borderland now. Can I have it? Kismet spread his hands. I didn't bring it with me, but don't worry, I put it in a very safe place. Saul withdrew his hand, wondering if Kismet was just unwilling to hand over the golden page right away. Since it wasn't here, Saul didn't bother pressing the matter. He quietly observed his surroundings, watching how those wizards were absorbing the soul-reading candles. He narrowed his eyes but couldn't see anything strange about the candles. It just seemed to be a special kind of energy. What are you doing here? After a while, seeing that Kismet was just sitting there without lighting a candle himself, Saul asked casually. Meeting someone, Kismet leaned lazily against the chair, one foot resting on the seat, delivering something. Another 5 minutes passed before Saul noticed Kismet's gaze fixating on the depths of the hall. He followed his line of sight and looked as well. The moment he turned his head, he saw a woman in a long red dress, her belly round and swollen, step out from behind layers upon layers of sheer curtains. There was a nonchalant smile on her face as she glanced over the people in the hall, as if she were looking down at ants on the ground. But when her gaze fell on Kismet, a sudden gleam lit up in her eyes. She walked through the crowd, ignoring the apprentices and wizards who bowed their heads to greet her, and made her way over. Kismet got up unhurriedly. He had only taken 2 steps when the red-dressed woman, belly leading the way, arrived in front of him. Long time no see, Kismet. I thought the Sky City lady had already dragged you back to be eaten. Dolly, Kismet tapped her lightly with his finger. Then the two shared a light hug. Standing nearby, Saul noticed that Kismet was careful not to touch her belly. The hug looked rather awkward. They soon pulled apart. Kismet stretched out his hand through the air, miming a gentle caress as he sighed. It's almost time. Dolly looked down at her belly and smiled. All thanks to you. So, Dolly invited Kismet to the back of the gauze curtain. The two didn't even exchange pleasantries and left directly. But just as Kismet lifted the curtain, she turned to glance at Saul and suddenly revealed a strange smile. So, this guy. Once Kismet was gone, Saul got up and left immediately. Staying in this pseudo-courtyard any longer gave him a vague sense that something bad might happen. Walking along the path, Saul returned to the area near the settlement's exit. There had to be more than one exit, but this was clearly the only one disclosed to outsiders. Saul figured that even if the quicksand termites in the survivors' forest were a hoax, he still wanted to check it out. After all, the one who told him that line was a liar too. Just as he was nearing the main gate, Saul suddenly saw a man carrying a boy, his whole body twitching and face pale, toward a corner by the wall where he casually tossed him onto the ground. Trailing behind was a bearded man, following closely. He didn't make it, the man who threw the boy said impatiently. Give me the food back. The bearded man walked to the corner, looked down at the boy who had just stopped twitching and touched his neck. Then he turned back with a sheepish grin and said, Ate it all. The other man cursed, slapped him across the face. Seeing that the bearded man didn't dodge and only grinned apologetically, he muttered curses and left. The bystanders witnessing the scene all cautiously made their way, fearing they might provoke the man's anger. Once the man had gone far enough, the bearded man scooped the boy up again. An elderly woman nearby seemed unable to bear it and advised softly, Find a proper place to bury the child. Leave him here and he'll be gone. But the bearded man shook his head. I made a deal with the mountain crosser. If he doesn't make it, I sell the body to him, can still get a bit of food. The old woman's eyes were filled with pity, but she knew she couldn't change anything, so she simply turned and left. Though Saul was standing at a distance, with his excellent eyesight he clearly saw everything that happened over there. The bearded man cradled the boy and walked through a large gate under the wall, vanishing into the shadows. Saul's gaze followed the boy's limp form into the darkness. With his abilities, he could naturally tell the boy wasn't dead. He had only entered a state of suspended breathing. But if he wasn't treated in time, that temporary suspension would soon turn into real death. Thinking of the new injury on the boy's foot, Saul stepped forward and followed. As he passed through the passage beneath the wall, the old man with the flower pot who was guarding the gate had been resting with his eyes closed. Sensing Saul's magic fluctuations, the flower pot old man opened his eyes immediately and stared at him. He didn't question Saul's behavior of entering and then leaving so soon. Instead, he seemed nervous. Saul, however, said nothing. He pretended to be just a passerby, showing no interest in the man ahead who had already exited the passage. Not until Saul exited the city gate and left the corridor did the flower pot old man slowly close his eyes again. Outside the settlement, Saul saw that the bearded man carrying the boy was already standing by the wall to his left. There was a small donkey cart parked there. Its rear compartment was covered by a large sheet of black leather, bulging high. A faint stench of corpses wafted from it. The moment Saul stepped out of the gate, his figure entered a hazy, illusory state. Even as he gradually approached the bearded man and the cart driver, neither of them noticed anything. He watched as the bearded man handed the boy over to the cart driver, and also gave him a small bundle. The driver said nothing, calmly tucked the bundle into his coat, then lifted the black leather at the back to reveal a pile of corpses stacked over a meter high. The bearded man instantly turned his head away, but couldn't help glancing back. The corpses were lightly dusted with soil, but it was still clear that most of them were blackened and red, some with skin that looked charred. Their deaths weren't bloody, but were still horrifying. The bearded man flinched, but the cart driver moved efficiently. He grabbed the boy by the waistband, lifted him up, and tossed him onto the top of the corpse pile. He shoved aside the bearded man who was about to say something more, then climbed onto the donkey cart and left swiftly. So this is the Mountain Crosser, just another ordinary man without magic. Saul stroked his chin and glanced at the bearded man who had already turned and was running back toward the gate. He chose to continue following the cart. The Mountain Crosser had a strong build. From the way he'd just lifted and thrown the boy, he seemed to have some martial skills. Out in the world, he might even qualify as a high-level warrior, but here, he could only work as a corpse hauler. Chapter 556, The Ant-Acid Flesh Nest. Saul followed the Mountain Crosser along the main path, entering a nearby grove of survivor trees. However, the Mountain Crosser took a slightly roundabout route, deliberately avoiding the area where those 7 blindfolded commoners had previously appeared. Saul trailed him into the woods and up a slope. Eventually, the donkey cart came to a stop. The Mountain Crosser driving the cart stood on the frame, lifted the black leather cover, and tossed the topmost boy down beneath the roots of a large tree. The donkey cart started up again, leaving the motionless boy behind as it continued deeper into the grove. But Saul didn't follow. His steps halted beside the boy. He crouched down, checking the boy's nose and mouth, then lifted his eyelids. Finally, he found a half-finger-length wooden spike lodged at the back of the boy's neck. The spike was embedded just beneath the skin, dangling there. Saul pulled it out, sniffed the tip, and showed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. So this is what they're using to fake death. A sort of underground transaction, huh? If they're caught, it's easy enough to turn the fake death into a real one. Saul examined the boy's hands and feet. Although the child appeared to be around 11 or 12, his hands were covered in calluses, clearly the result of frequent labor. As he looked, Saul let out a quiet "hmm." He reached out and pinched the boy's skull and spine. This kid has been forcibly matured. Though the boy looked around 10 or so, his actual age was likely only 7 or 8. Just like wheat in the fields, he'd been artificially helped to grow faster. Even after Saul's brief examination, the boy still didn't wake up. If this kept up, he'd go from fake death to real death. Looks like the people running this business don't really care about the survival rate of their merchandise. That bearded man must have used some connections to smuggle the boy out of the settlement using this fake death method. The Mountain Crosser and the potted plant old man guarding the gate probably knew too. They turned a blind eye, most likely because they profited from it. From how little they cared about the boy now, it was clear they'd already been paid. Whether the delivery survived or not didn't matter. Let fate decide. Or perhaps it was better if he died. No loose ends. Seeing the boy's life slipping away, Saul suddenly snapped his fingers. A healing spell descended, pulling the child back from the brink of death. His eyes flew open. Cough, 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 cough. The moment the boy woke up, he burst into violent coughs. Brushing so close to death had left his body severely weakened. When he finally caught his breath, the edge of his vision caught sight of a man in a wizard's robe crouching beside him. Faced with Saul, the man who just saved his life, the boy's eyes filled with fear. He instinctively tried to crawl away, but smacked hard into the tree behind him. Dry twigs and dead leaves fell from above, brushing past his head. No need to be afraid. Being afraid won't help. I ask, you answer, got it. The boy's back pressed tightly against the tree trunk. He swallowed with difficulty. His mouth was so dry it felt like fire. After a moment, he calmed slightly and nodded. He stared at Saul like a baby rabbit just out of the nest. That bearded man, is he your father? The boy hesitated. "If you lie, I'll kill you," Saul said, his voice utterly flat. Faced with the threat of death, the boy didn't show the same fear and panic as when he first realized Saul was standing beside him. "Yes. When I arrived, I saw you trying to escape, but you were pinned down and had 2 holes punched into your feet. What were they doing?" "They said I'd grown up and could be used to make a meat nest. I saw the boy ahead of me get holes punched in his feet, and they put 2 ants inside. He screamed in pain. I was so scared I ran." "What about this wooden spike?" Saul held up the spike he'd pulled from the back of the boy's neck. The boy stared at it blankly and shook his head. "Then how did you end up being dumped here?" The boy thought for a moment. "After they caught me, they put an ant in my foot too, but as soon as it crawled in, the pain knocked me out. I don't know what happened after that." "Oh, your father secretly arranged to have you sent out of the settlement, but he didn't give you any instructions on how to survive once you were outside." The boy still wore a blank look, but Saul could clearly hear the sudden acceleration of his heartbeat. "As I thought, any truly naive fool would have long died in a place like this." Saul shook his head inwardly. He didn't continue pressing the issue. That line had only been to signal to the boy, "I've got your secret now." Next comes the real questioning. What is the meat nest? Are ordinary people not allowed to leave this settlement? Do many of the wizards who come here actually leave? Some of the questions the boy answered. For others, he simply shook his head, indicating he didn't know. After more or less digging out everything useful in the boy's mind, Saul stood up again. He looked at the boy, weakly leaning against the tree, and pulled out some food from his storage vessel, tossing it onto him. The small bundle the boy's father had handed to the corpse hauler was probably meant to be food for the boy. But since the hauler had never intended for the boy to survive, he had, of course, kept the food for himself. "This is your payment for answering my questions. Of course, if you were telling the full truth, you could have gotten even more." With that, Saul turned to head deeper into the forest. He was planning to look for some humpback termites. If their acid really could be used to create a miraculous drug, one with no side effects, that allowed a wizard's brain to operate at high speed, then it was bound to become a rare and coveted magical ingredient, fought over by countless wizards. Better that he start researching it now. Still, since the humpback termites were so miraculous, there was no doubt someone would be guarding them. Saul would have to move carefully and stay hidden, lest he draw the attention of a second-rank wizard in the settlement. But he had barely taken 2 steps when he heard the boy call out behind him. "Wizard sir, please, wait a moment." Saul paused and looked back. "Sir, may I?" "No." Saul already knew what the boy was going to ask, and refused without the slightest hesitation. When he'd checked the boy's body earlier, he had discovered that this prematurely forced-grown child's soul body and physical form were both already severely damaged. Forget becoming an apprentice. Surviving healthily to the age of 20 would be a stretch. Unless he had the kind of luck protagonists in novels did, stumbling upon some miraculous elixir or treasure. Reshaping his soul body, awakening magical aptitude, amplifying his elemental perception, he had no chance of learning anything. The boy wanted to plead further, but when he looked up and met Saul's gaze, calm as the depths of the ocean, he found himself unable to say a word. "He's smart enough. A shame, really," Saul thought as the boy, knowing his place, fell silent. Saul turned and walked away. In the forest, he released little Algie. "Be careful not to alert anyone or anything around here." Little Algie leapt to the ground and burrowed into the soil, vanishing from sight. Roughly half an hour later, it suddenly emerged again, its black tendrils coiling around Saul's ankle. Saul followed the pull of little Algie's guidance, moving forward without making a sound. Before long, he saw several familiar figures in the forested hills ahead. They were thin, emaciated people, blindfolded with black cloth and shackled at the ankles. The one in the lead also held a lantern, moving forward silently. According to the boy's description, these people were the meat nests, used for harvesting termite acid. Saul quickly circled ahead of the 7, but found they weren't the same ones he'd seen earlier. Looks like most of the ordinary people in this tiny settlement are just backup ingredients for making meat nests. Chapter 557, Almost There. Saul followed behind the group of blindfolded people, all the way into the depths of the forested mountains. After several twists and turns, a wizard apprentice appeared ahead. He stepped forward to inspect the state of the 7 people, then led them into a mountain cave. Inside the cave were 2 wizards, who, upon seeing them, ordered the group to step into small earthen pits, each about half a meter deep. Saul remained just outside the cave, his figure hidden behind a rock. His mental power far exceeded that of anyone inside. They couldn't detect his presence at all. However, the warding formation at the cave entrance prevented Saul from entering directly. Peering in, he saw that the legs of the 7 blindfolded people had already been buried in soil. The other wizards stood far away from them. After a few minutes, one of the blindfolded individuals began showing signs of pain on his face. Gradually, the rest of them also started to contort in agony. But it only lasted for a few dozen seconds before the pain disappeared from all their faces, replaced once again by numb expressions. Saul's gaze moved from their faces to their soil-covered legs. Ants in the soil. They want the ants to crawl into their bodies, bite from the inside, and leave behind formic acid. Then, from the bodies of these ordinary people, they extract the needed material to make soul-reading candles. They're extracting the formic acid here without much concealment, which means this extraction step isn't the important one. What really matters is how they re-extract the non-toxic formic acid from the human body and refine it into candles that can activate the mental realm. That second extraction method surely belonged to the Grand Shaman. Saul wasn't planning to take the risk of stealing it. He wasn't yet at the point of needing drugs to activate his brain for studying. The ones who truly needed soul-reading candles were often wizards and apprentices stuck at a bottleneck, who had been unable to advance for a long time and were starting to suffer backlash from accumulated knowledge. Most of the wizards at the Panditing he visited earlier were probably in that very situation. At this point, the wizards inside the cave began speaking softly. Why are there so few ants today? Maybe they're just not that hungry recently. Oh, come on. The Grand Shaman only lets us build 7 meat nests each time precisely to stop the ants from hauling away too much food at once. Their voices quickly fell quiet again. Since Saul didn't get any more information, he simply left. Could that old witch really have mistaken the hunchback termites for quicksand termites? Her brain may not work well, but her eyes should be fine, Saul muttered with some frustration. If there were no quicksand termites here, not only had he come for nothing, but he'd also lost track of any other leads on them. If he really couldn't find quicksand termites, he'd have to look for some alternatives. But those alternatives were either dangerous or even rarer, none easy to obtain. Saul wandered into the ancient woods, debating whether to continue searching nearby or head back. Suddenly, his coat pocket vibrated. Reaching inside, Saul's brows furrowed deeply. He felt the candle that Kismet had placed in his pocket. But there was something else, a piece of paper. Saul was sure he hadn't put any paper in there. He pulled his hand out, fingertips pinching a scrap of paper. One sentence was written on it. The golden page is with me, 4th row, house number 4. That bastard, Saul took a deep breath. Kismet had definitely done this on purpose. The importance of a golden page needed no explanation. Even if Kismet was playing games, Saul had no choice but to go and see. He picked up his pace and quickly reached the forest's edge. And there he ran into that boy again. The boy was hiding behind a tree, hesitating as he looked toward the settlement. "If you go back, both you and your father are as good as dead." The boy jumped in fright at Saul's voice. But seeing it was him, he let out a breath of relief. "Sir, I wasn't planning to go back. I just can't stop worrying about my father and younger brother. Leaving like this, I might never see them again. Besides, I've been in that settlement with my father since I was little. I've never left before. I don't even know where to go." Saul raised a hand and pointed in a direction. "Go that way. Walk for 2 days and you'll reach another settlement, though that might just be another cage." Saul didn't know how these ordinary people ended up in the borderland. Maybe the wizards here just needed some humans to handle the most basic labor. "Sir, could I know your name?" The boy's eyes were full of gratitude. But Saul ignored him. He walked past the boy out of the forest and before nightfall re-entered the settlement. The pot-plant old man recognized Saul. After all, there weren't many wizards who could get Kismet to personally make introductions. He let Saul through without question. Saul didn't ask the pot-plant old man for directions. Instead, he casually stopped a regular resident in the settlement. The moment these people saw Saul's robes, they eagerly pointed the way for him. Some even wanted to personally escort him there, though Saul declined. Before long, he arrived at room 4 of row 4. The door swung open with a light push, as if the absent-minded owner had just stepped out moments ago. The room wasn't large. Upon entering, Saul immediately saw a note pinned to the opposite wall. Only 4 words were written on it. "Be right back." Saul's expression changed. He instantly turned to leave. But the moment he stepped 1 foot outside the room, a scream tore through the street. The dusky sky above changed color in an instant. Saul walked onto the street and looked up. Above the settlement's walls, a massive green, arching barrier had appeared. Some quick-reacting wizards immediately cast flight and soared into the sky. But before they could get close, a burst of green mist shot violently from the barrier, blasting one wizard square in the face. The wizard shrieked and plummeted back to the ground. Before anyone could make sense of what was happening, a deafening boom rang out. The sound was so loud that it echoed even within the green barrier. Saul flew to a rooftop. Only then did he see it. Pandading, the place he had just visited, had completely collapsed. What happened at Pandading? That was the question on everyone's mind. Several wizards immediately took to low-altitude flight, weaving beneath the looming green dome as they rushed toward the fallen building. But Saul's first reaction was to sprint toward the settlement gate. Now he understood what "be right back" really meant. Kismet was trying to create a golden page right here. But golden pages were incredibly complex in origin. Could a small settlement like this really birth one? As he ran, Saul's mind raced. Though the enemy hadn't yet shown themselves, Saul had full faith in Kismet's knack for stirring up chaos. Just then, a strange buzzing sound began behind him. Buzz-zz-zz-zz-zz. It wasn't loud, but it echoed throughout the entire settlement. Saul turned back, and to his astonishment, saw a giant white termite hovering in the air. 2 pairs of wings flapped behind it, so fast they left only afterimages. The termite was at least 5 meters long, its massive mandibles gleaming with a chilling light even from afar, looking sharp enough to sever a man in half at a glance. Looking closer, Saul noticed that someone was riding the termite. A dark-skinned man sat at the joint behind the ant's head, cradling something in his arms. Saul squinted, narrowing his eyes to make out the details in the distance. And what the man held was the severed head of that large-bellied woman Saul had met before, Dolly. Chapter 558, Like Ants. Just as everyone was still reeling in shock, A few of the wizards who had first rushed toward the courtyard had already approached the man riding the white termite. Though they were clearly anxious, they still behaved with utmost respect toward the man. Could that man be the second-rank wizard of this settlement, the one they call the Grand Shaman? Saul frowned deeply, feeling an overwhelming sense of danger from the figure. As if to confirm Saul's instinct, the Grand Shaman suddenly raised Dolly's severed head. His lips moved as though saying something, and in the next instant, several fine streams of white mist sprayed out from the white termite. The expressions of the few wizards near the Grand Shaman changed drastically. They immediately turned and tried to flee, but their reactions were too slow. The white mist quickly spread to where they were. What happened next was almost beyond belief. The wizards caught by the mist all came to a sudden halt. Then, one by one, they turned around and began approaching the Grand Shaman again. No, more accurately, they were approaching the massive white termite. As soon as one of them got close, the white termite raised its head. With a snap of its massive mandibles, it bit the wizard clean in two. The lower half of the wizard's body fell to the ground, while the upper half was caught and held by the termite's forelimbs, lifted before its face like a person holding food, and it began feasting. This gruesome and brutal scene terrified the people below. They screamed and scattered in panic, desperate to flee this horrific place. Yet the wizards hovering in the air beside the white termite showed no signs of escaping. It was as though they had completely forgotten their desire to run moments ago. The giant white termite devoured its food with alarming speed. In just a few bites, it had finished the upper half of the first wizard. Instead of bothering with the remains on the ground, it turned to face the second wizard. And just like the first, this wizard didn't dodge or resist. He even moved forward slightly, as if accepting his fate as food. This time, the termite didn't bother cutting him in half first. It seemed to understand that there would be no resistance. It simply grabbed him and took a huge bite out of his head. Blood gushed like a fountain, spilling to the ground below, striking fear into the hearts of all who witnessed it like a storm of dread. By now, Saul had already reached the city gate. The moment the termite had bitten the first wizard in half, he had stopped observing and turned to run. But even in that short moment, Saul had picked up on several key details. The mist released by the white termite seemed capable of manipulating the nervous system. He also noticed that the termite didn't just release the mist once and then begin feeding. It was continuously emitting mist throughout its feast. The mist spread extremely quickly. Soon, the sky above was filled with a thick white cloud. And that cloud was still expanding outward at a rapid pace. Looking up at the green barrier overhead, Saul suddenly had the feeling of being a bird trapped in a cage. When he arrived at the city gate, he found several wizards already gathered there. Ordinary people from nearby had also crowded around. Everyone was desperate to break through and escape, but the gate was firmly shut. Those who approached it were attacked by a toxic gas. The gas was terrifyingly potent. Anyone touched by it immediately collapsed with a scream, their skin shriveling rapidly until they became withered yellow corpses. The crowd backed away in fear once more. Through a gap in the crowd, Saul spotted several bodies lying on the ground. Among them, the old man with the flower pot who guarded the gate. Behind him, the enormous white termite had already finished its nearby prey and was slowly turning its head toward the gate, likely attracted by the large number of wizards gathered there. Saul turned his gaze back to the gate. He could tell that escaping the settlement meant he would have to break the poisonous spell formation woven into the door. However, that formation was hidden within the gate and wall itself. On top of that, various broken and decoy spell formations were layered over it to obscure any attempt at deciphering. To crack the formation would take considerable time. Even with his diary helping him correct mistakes, Saul knew it would be nearly impossible to finish before the white termite reached him. The giant white termite behind was flying fast, almost overhead now. At that moment, the diary in Saul's mind flipped open, issuing a warning. Lunar calendar, year 318, October 13. The earthbound guest has grown wings and stepped onto the sky's grand stage. The puppets dance and the cries of the weak together compose the stage upon which bitch ascends. Look, look, see how the god worshipped by the ignorant is born from the lowliest of origins, grows stronger beneath the gaze of its mother, and reigns recklessly in the skies. Look, look, watch how bit by bit it devours you whole. Death warning. Saul swept his eyes over the diary's writing, picked out a few key words, and didn't linger. He immediately turned and slipped into the residential area of the common folk. The houses there were densely and chaotically built. Once inside, a person could vanish from sight in an instant. While Saul hid, others were also trying to think of solutions. One of them carefully collected the toxic gas sprayed from the gate and ordered his flying familiar to retrieve a corpse from the ground and carry it toward the white termite. However, the great shaman riding the termite made no response to the clearly suspicious corpse. He simply let the termite devour it. As the corpse was crushed, a puff of green mist burst out, but before it could cause harm, it was instantly neutralized by a white vapor sprayed from the termite's body, turning pale yellow. The attack had clearly lost all potency. Seeing this, the wizard who had tried to resist the mist came up with another plan. He chanted a spell, attempting to collect the white vapor sprayed by the termite, hoping to use it against the poison mist at the gate. To avoid losing control upon contact, he wrapped himself in 2 layers of magical protection and held his breath. But the moment his spell touched the white vapor, his body suddenly froze. The light in his eyes vanished at once. Now, all his mind could focus on was the massive mandibles of the white termite. He was consumed with the desire to offer himself up to it. So the wizard drifted toward the termite, swaying unsteadily in the air, only to follow the same fate as those before him. From then on, no one dared resist the great shaman and his termite. They only thought of how to survive and escape this settlement alive. The settlement was small, and the number of official wizards within it was naturally limited, perhaps 8 or 9 total, and in just a few moments 4 or 5 had already been devoured. The remaining apprentices and common folk were scared out of their minds. People scattered, each trying to find their own means of escape. But very soon, the ordinary residents of the settlement noticed something peculiar. The giant white termite wasn't attacking them. It was only eating wizards. A confused mix of terror and faint, guilty relief began to spread among the crowd of commoners. They looked at one another, each suppressing the subtle emotions flickering in their eyes. At the same time, the white vapor began to spread through the air, filling the entire settlement. With the massive green barrier trapping it inside, the place became blanketed in fog. Within the mist, the wizards and apprentices who had been trying to run or hide began to relax, their bodies loosening. One by one, they turned around and slowly drifted toward the giant white termite. And the great shaman riding atop it looked down coldly at these wizards and apprentices as they approached, just like one might watch a line of termites crawling across the ground. Chapter 559, The Frustrated Great Shaman. The great shaman's face appeared calm, but his heart was far from composed. He was not nearly as aloof as he appeared. In fact, he was furious, deeply frustrated. The giant white termite he was currently controlling was supposed to be born from Dolly's abdomen a year or 2 later. By then, the humpback termite that emerged would have reached the peak of 2nd rank right out of its birth. Once it finished feeding, it could directly ascend to 3rd rank. A 3rd rank white termite, among some ignorant races, would be worshipped as a god. Monty had originally planned to sacrifice Dolly at the time of the termite's evolution, thereby seizing complete control of this demonic creature. But everything happened far too suddenly. The termite in Dolly's belly burst out for unknown reasons. He had no choice but to abandon Dolly's life immediately, hide his own magical and mental power, and use Dolly's severed head to release a psychic signature familiar to the termite in order to control it. Because of this, the premature termite only possessed the power of a standard second-rank creature. Even if it devoured all the candle-exposed wizards in this settlement, it still wouldn't be able to break into third rank. Everything that happened today was too sudden. Otherwise, I could have prepared more food for you. Monty gently stroked the termite's head, not daring to vent his frustration on it. Until he found a better method of control, he couldn't even cast spells. Otherwise, it would be too easy for the termite to discover he was Dolly. The white termite didn't respond to Monty. It was entirely focused on its meal. Though it didn't like having someone riding on its back since it was its mother, it tolerated it reluctantly. Monty narrowed his eyes, scanning the entire settlement. The wizards here should all have used the soul-reading candles. Even if one or two slip through the cracks, it doesn't matter. The gate is shut. I can take my time. Although the giant white termite had lost its chance at a direct breakthrough to third rank, the more wizards it devoured, the faster its power would grow. Monty wouldn't let a single one escape. At this moment, Saul was hiding inside a seam space. This defensive curse barely leaked even a trace of magical or mental energy. But at the same time, the seam could only hold one person, him. When he first developed this curse, the space inside had been tiny, forcing him to curl up while hiding in it. Now that he had grown, the inner space had expanded accordingly, but even so, Saul still had to hunch inside. It felt as if the space had been custom-fit to his body. Outside, the situation had descended into chaos. The wizards were stumbling forward like sleepwalkers toward the white god of death, while the ordinary people, realizing the wizards had lost their minds, poured into their territory, looting as they pleased. Some bold individuals even dared to attack the wizards, perhaps driven by some long-suppressed hatred. Those who targeted low-level apprentices managed to kill their enemies, but the reckless ones who tried attacking high-level apprentices or true wizards were often struck down before they could even touch them, killed instantly by backlash from residual magic. Saul remained curled up in silence, carefully analyzing the situation. The seam doesn't block airflow, which means the gas released by the white termite should be entering this small space too. Agu, but master, you haven't lost your mind at all. That means the termite's gas probably has no effect on you. Morden, if this gas is meant to control wizards' minds, it must have a very strict condition for activation. Saul had already figured it out. No doubt, it's because of the soul-reading candles. These wizards and apprentices stayed here so long precisely to use those candles to temporarily activate their brains, and having used them for so long, they fell under the influence of the humpback termite's acid-producing master. Agu, they raised humpback termites and even consumed their secretions, only to become the termites' food in the end. How ironic. Morden, humpback termites secrete acid to bring back food. This is perfectly logical. Saul couldn't see the giant white termite feasting, but even imagining the scene told him how gruesome it must be. He thought to himself, the one executing all of this must be Great Shaman Monty, but the one who devised this scheme. Saul smacked his lips. It's still relatively safe where I'm hiding now, but staying hidden like this is too passive. Once the white termites finish devouring all the wizards, Monty will definitely begin searching for anyone still in hiding like me. If I'm found, it'll be like being cornered in a dead-end alley. A great shaman, and a second-rank white termite. No matter how he looked at it, Saul didn't see any chance of winning. Saul shifted his focus back to the diary. I must take the initiative to adapt. But just as Saul was planning how to escape the settlement, a dramatic change occurred outside. The ordinary people, who had taken advantage of the chaos to loot supplies, didn't notice that many small, white termites had suddenly emerged from the ground within the settlement. Once these termites crawled to the surface, they immediately aimed their antennae at the running passers-by. A man holding several bulging cloth bags came onto the street, ready to target his next victim. But after only a few steps, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his toe. He immediately looked down and saw a white termite clinging to his foot. At once, he recalled the gigantic white termite in the sky over the square, and goosebumps surged from his toes all the way up to his scalp. He instantly raised his foot and began shaking it furiously, trying to fling the eerie termite off. But after flailing until his leg was sore, he finally paused, only to find the small white termite was still firmly attached to his toe. And by now, his foot had gone completely numb. The man dropped the bags from his left hand and tried to swat the termite away. But the moment he bent down, he lost his balance and fell to the ground with a heavy thud. All across the street, more and more people were falling victim to these white termites that had appeared from who knows where. At first it was just a slight sting, then came numbness. As the numbness spread through their limbs, the bitten began collapsing one by one, helplessly watching the termites continue to dig into their bodies. But at this point, the settlement was too chaotic, and the initial victims of the white termites weren't given much attention. By the time everyone noticed these tiny killers crawling across the ground, the hunchback white termites had already spread across the entire settlement like a wildfire. At that moment, Saul had made up his mind. He closed the diary. Placing both hands on the edge of the narrow gap, he poked his head out and squeezed his whole body through an opening no wider than a palm. As soon as he landed, he felt a massive spiritual pressure coming from behind. He turned his head and saw that the giant white termite had grown to 10 meters long. Saul carefully remained silent, pressed close to the wall, pulled up his hood to help mask his presence, and watched his step to avoid the termites on the ground. But after just 2 steps, he bumped into a man running frantically while clutching a child. The man's face was scruffy. It was the father of the boy who had earlier faked death to escape. He was still holding the child tightly, glancing back every few steps as he ran. And behind him, a massive tide of white surged down the street and over the walls. Atop that white wave of terror, bits and pieces of human and animal remains were being dragged along. It was clear, if that white wave caught up to them, the man and the child would meet a horrifying end. The man stumbled slightly while running and nearly fell, but with sheer willpower and quick reflexes, he planted a hand on the ground and forced himself upright to keep going. That's when Saul suddenly stepped into his path. The man hadn't noticed Saul before. Now, judging by his clothes, he realized he was facing a wizard. "Get in!" Saul grabbed the man by the collar with one hand and flung him toward a nearby house. The man thought Saul was going to kill them. He hugged the child tightly in fear as they flew through the air. With a crash, they broke through the flimsy window frame and landed hard inside the house. Gritting through the pain, the man opened his eyes and saw a massive transparent dome covering him and the child. Several white termites crawled in through the broken window, but after circling the outside of the dome in confusion, they wandered away. Saul didn't even glance at the man inside the room. After casting soul armor on both the man and child, he immediately took to the air, heading straight for the settlement's outer wall. Chapter 560, I Have Someone Above Me. Saul ran while saving people along the way. Every time he rescued someone, He would throw the ordinary folk into nearby houses, shield them with a protective spell, and then leave immediately, never lingering a second longer. Before long, the scattered magical fluctuations from the soul armor spell caught the attention of the Grand Shaman in the distance. He turned his head to look. Someone's casting spells over there. The sources are too scattered, can't tell how many wizards are in action. HMPH, you think these petty tricks can stop me from finding you? The Grand Shaman sneered coldly. He bent down to pat the termite and at the same time held high Dolly's severed head. These obedient little snacks nearby can wait. Let's go enjoy the main course first. The termite was somewhat reluctant, but after repeated urging from the Grand Shaman, it left behind 3 sluggish wizards it hadn't had time to devour and flew toward the outer wall. Monty rode the termite and quickly reached a house that was emanating magical energy. He had the termite descend slightly and peeked inside, only to find several ordinary people huddled within the protection of soul armor, trembling in fear. A wizard actually saving ordinary people. Monty was first surprised, then amused, and finally his eyes flashed with calculation. HMPH, mere bait. No matter how you use them to try and conceal your movements, it's useless. Your final goal has already been exposed. The Grand Shaman patted the termite's head and ignored the magical ripples coming from various other houses. He flew straight over the rooftops, heading rapidly for the outer wall. As soon as he arrived, he spotted a cloaked figure crouching suspiciously in a corner of the wall, their body partially hidden by local junk carts. However, both Monty and the termite had their own methods of detecting hidden wizards. Especially the termite. Without even needing Monty's command, it darted forward the moment it spotted the figure. It stopped with surgical precision just behind the target, avoiding the wall that would release toxic gas upon impact. Its massive, razor-sharp mandibles opened and snapped shut, cutting the figure in half. It all happened in the blink of an eye. The crouched figure was split cleanly in two, the upper half lifted by the termite's forelimbs, the lower half falling limply to the ground. But there was no explosion of blood. Monty instantly realized something was wrong. Fall back. But the termite didn't immediately obey and continued chomping, trying to devour the target. Just as Monty was about to repeat the order, the severed figure suddenly cried out in pain, drowning out his voice. Ow, 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 I'm in 2 pieces, 2 pieces, 2 pieces. The hood fell away, and the bitten head twisted around to face Monty, revealing the figure's true face. Beneath the cloak was a soul body. That soul was none other than Herman. In one hand, he held a still-burning soul candle, using its flame to continuously irritate the feeding termite. In the other, he gripped a regular brick, scavenged from who knows where, and swung it violently toward the termite's head. Monty was startled but not worried. This soul's state of existence was strange, yes, but it was still no match for a second-rank humpback termite. Even if the termite wasn't adept at dealing with soul bodies, its physical strength alone was more than enough to crush him. Crack! The brick struck the termite's head. It didn't react at all, but the brick shattered into several pieces. One fragment, seemingly by chance, bounced toward the Grand Shaman. Monty didn't pay the flying debris any mind. He was already curious about this peculiar spirit, one that could wear clothes, hold candles, and even wield a brick. He was considering taking it back for study, maybe even to see if it could be tamed. It was precisely this moment of curiosity that made him delay, evading the flying brick fragment. That shard, about half the size of a palm, had a narrow fissure running through it. At first glance, it seemed completely ordinary. But in the very next moment, a figure suddenly burst from within the crack. Saul had only just emerged halfway when he instantly summoned a black blade, and in a flash, shattered the head Monty was holding. Yet although Monty, immediately sensed danger the moment he saw Saul and activated the defensive enchantment on his robe. He never expected that Saul would aim straight for Dolly's head. The black blade clashed with the just-activated defensive magic, but almost without resistance, it pierced through and plunged directly into Dolly's skull. In the very next moment, under Saul's control, the black blade exploded inside her head. Flesh and bone splattered, red and white bits flying everywhere. Splatters covered the white ant's head and slowly slid down its smooth shell. The white termite gnawing on Herman immediately froze. Its antennae twitched wildly in the air as it slowly turned its head, seemingly falling into a deep sense of unease. Monty's face darkened instantly. He raised his hand and hurled an acid orb at Saul. Saul immediately ducked beneath the termite's belly, grabbing hold of one of its legs to evade the corrosive acid. The acid orb struck the white termite, but it caused no harm. However, it snapped the creature out of its daze. Having lost Dolly's spiritual guidance, it had been momentarily disoriented. A wave of savage fury suddenly erupted from the white termite. Its wings flared and trembled violently, buzzing so loudly they knocked Monty off its back. Monty knew that without Dolly's head, the white termite would soon turn on him. But still, he kept most of his attention focused on Saul. Though the giant hunchback white termite was also a second-rank creature, it had only just been born and lacked coherent thought. Naturally, it was no match for someone like him, who had been a second-rank wizard for decades. So Monty wasn't too concerned about the termite's rebellion. Even without Dolly, he had other means to regain control. It would just be more troublesome and take some extra time. Right now, he needed to take care of this troublesome brat first. Monty soared into the air, easily dodging the termite's charge. The offensive spell he had prepared was altered at the last second into a binding spell. Whether it was Saul's method of manipulating a soul body or hiding in cracks to evade detection, Monty had already made up his mind. He would keep this kid alive. He'd squeeze every drop of knowledge from Saul's brain, then toss him to the ants as nourishment for their evolution. But while Monty planned to spare Saul's life, Saul had no intention of sparing his. As the overwhelming magical pressure of a second-rank wizard came crashing down, Saul instantly released several translucent tendrils from his body to resist it. Monty's binding spell failed to restrain Saul in the first instant. The tendrils coiled around Saul were crushed one by one under the immense pressure, buying him only a moment. But a moment was all Saul needed. While facing off with Monty, Saul suddenly opened his mouth and stuck out his tongue. Etched on the tip of his tongue was a miniature spell formation, the mental battlefield. In Monty's eyes, a strange pattern suddenly materialized in front of him. The design consisted of multiple overlapping circles, arranged with no apparent logic. Intersecting, inscribed, circumscribed. Together they formed a complex, ever-shifting ring. When Monty tried to shift his gaze away, he discovered the circles were spinning rapidly, like interlocking gears. The gears suddenly jammed, then began trembling violently before exploding outward in all directions. Monty's heart jolted as he snapped back to awareness, only to realize he was no longer in the settlement, but standing on a massive circular platform. Above and below him stretched a tranquil, star-filled night sky. Countless stars twinkled like blinking eyes. An illusion. No, this is a consciousness realm. Impressive. Saul's figure suddenly appeared at one edge of the platform, or perhaps he had been standing there all along. No wonder you're a second-rank wizard. You're the first to figure out so quickly where you are. Monty looked at Saul like he was an idiot. Do you have any idea how powerful a second-rank hunchbacked white termite is? You trap me in your consciousness realm, but that means you're distracted. Very soon, that white termite will devour you whole. Saul only chuckled. Of course I know, I already got a good look earlier. He pointed upward. But the difference between you and me is I've got someone above me. You don't. So the termite will eat you first. I just need to leave after you die.